Superman and the country of the United States of America are the same thing. Not really, but Superman is like a mascot for American culture. His catchphrase was literally truth, justice, and the American way. Country boy, upstanding journalist, American icon. Q gasps when he renounced his American citizenship in 2011's Action Comics 900. The reason he did it was because he didn't want to be tied to the US anymore, but not for the reason you might think. So what happened is he flew to show support for a protest in another country. He was showing his support, Superman support, but the government of that country thought he was acting on behalf of America and took his presence as a declaration of war, which was not Superman's intention at all. So he wanted to separate from his American status so he could stand up for what he believes in without causing an international incident. The good news for those that disliked this change, it didn't last long. The New 52 reboot happened the same year, that's a whole other can of worms, and it made Superman an American again. Batman The Dark Knight is an incredible movie. A cold take, I know. The scene where James Gordon was revealed to actually be alive, I think I lurched out of my seat when I first watched it. Gordon saves the mayor's life at the cost of his own. Well, but then after the epic car chase, ending with Joker standing over the beaten body of Batman, suddenly the Joker is pushed aside and it's, surprise, James, he's alive. That's cinema, that's art, and that is Oscar worthy. Also, there is a photo that is, I'm pretty sure from when they filmed this scene, of Heath Ledger's Joker skateboard flipping over Christian Bale's Batman, and it should be in the Louvre. Maybe the greatest underdog comeback story I have ever heard, ever read, Kite Man. This villain started out as a random joke character in the lore of Batman and has worked his way up to being a fan favorite that is now getting his own animated series that's inspirational. The character appeared in Harley Quinn, the animated series, and that's when his popularity really kicked off. Now his own show is set to premiere this year. He really is a character you have to love, goofball through and through. If you didn't catch it from his name, he fights with kite-themed items, and of course he flies around using a kite. I love the villains that pick something and stick to it like their life depends on it. The lore of Kite Man's life, or Charles Brown's life, is also just really interesting in the comics. The guy designed the Joker-mobile, for crying out loud. There was this moment when the Riddler and the Joker were fighting over the right to kill Batman, so civilized. Batman contacted Brown to act as his eyes and ears in the villain feud because Brown already had a connection to the Joker since he designed his car. Brown agreed to help out the Bat, but unfortunately, the Riddler found out about it and proceeded to respond in quite possibly the most unhinged manner possible, creating one of the funniest villains in the process. Brown's son went out to fly his kite, and that was the last thing he would ever do. He did not know the Riddler poisoned the kite's string. This tragedy with the kite created Kite Man, but Kite Man blamed Batman for getting him into the mess and became a villain for real. The Harley Quinn show gave us so much, not just Kite Man's popularity, but also the engagement of quite the pair of villains, Clock King and the Riddler. The writers were just out here doing whatever they wanted, and I love that for them. In the Harley Quinn TV show episode Harley Quinn, A Very Problematic Valentine's Day Special, we see the proposal. It's very romantic, a heart up in the night sky, and the billboards in the main city square are filled with question marks, and Clock King, will you marry me? Perfect, no notes, I love it when people have fun. It's hard to believe, but Wonder Woman once lost her title. The 90s were the era of experimentation. No one, no matter how loved or established you were, was safe. The 90s robbed Wonder Woman of the name Wonder Woman. She was replaced by Artemis, an Amazon warrior. Though she lost her name, they could not take her spirit, and she continued fighting crime. Now the second half of this, she got a new outfit for fighting crime, and lots of people hated it, including some DC artists. The main critique of it was that it was just too far off from her usual iconic look. She was basically unrecognizable. She looks great, but not like the Diana everyone knows. Thankfully, by the end of the storyline that featured biker Diana, she was back as Wonder Woman. People hated it that much. Moving into a different animated universe and villainification of James Gordon, the beloved police chief. Batman Gotham by Gaslight was an animated movie released by Warner Bros. It was for adults as it handled some adult themes. Jack the Ripper targeted a very specific type of person. So in the world of this movie, Gotham exists when the actual Jack the Ripper did, the Victorian era. Batman in this world is trying to figure out the identity of Jack the Ripper along with the police chief James Gordon. Imagine my shock and surprise to learn that Jack was James the whole time. Turns out James's time in the Civil War messed with him mentally, and he claimed his work was holy. Thou shalt not kill does not exist here, I guess. James claimed that he was just clearing the world of filth, in his words. He gets cleared by Batman in a collapsed Ferris wheel. Wild but fun story. I wouldn't have ever thought to make Police Chief James Gordon a notorious London criminal, but it served. Character deaths can be pretty unexpected depending on the person, but no death made my jaw drop quite the way Snowflame's third one did. Not his first or his second, his third. I mean, the entire character is wild. He is literally a villain that gets his power from a super substance that shares the same name with Coca-Cola. What is that? Who comes up with that? Anyway, the villain is featured as a main antagonist in Peacemaker Tries Hard 4. That series is known to be a little silly, and yet I still never would have guessed how Snowflame was going to be defeated. So Snowflame captures Peacemaker and also Red Bee. He's got them tied up, but they escape. Snowflame heads to a table with a mountain of the snow to recharge himself for battle. Things aren't looking good for the hero. Snowflame is seriously powerful, but the next time Snowflame goes to recharge is where the tide turns, in the wildest of ways. Instead of getting snow in his nose, he gets an entire poison dart frog. Literally, what is happening? Never, ever would I have guessed how that fight was going to end. Goodbye, Snowflame. You will not be missed. Alfred, Batman's trusted butler and low-key father figure, his villain arc had me on the edge of my seat. This man deserves nothing but good. Imagine having to corral Bruce Wayne and you get repaid by getting smashed by a boulder. Leave the man alone. The boulder was the start of his villain arc. Alfred literally did not choose the villain life chose him. After getting hit by a boulder, he was kidnapped, and if that wasn't bad enough, the people that kidnapped him experimented on his body and then brought him back to life like he was Frankenstein's monster, and all that monster wanted to do was off his family. Poor Alfred, I could not imagine a worse fate. The reason he hates his family, Batman and Robin, so much is because the experiment on his brain essentially reversed everything. So all the love was transformed into hate and he became the outsider. Thankfully, Batman loves Alfred and is a rich genius, so he funded the research to get Alfred cured. He got 50% cured. The outsider still lives inside him but rarely emerges. He does, but rarely. Still, the sweet butler becoming a Batman-hating villain was never on my bingo card. I know we don't like remembering Superman Blue and Red, but we must. This storyline was controversial among fans, most hated it, and that is so fair. Superman is one DC character that has been around forever, so most people know what's up with the Man of Steel. Worlds were rocked with the 1998 version of Superman Red and Superman Blue. Superman temporarily lost his regular powers and developed energy-based powers, and then to top it all off, he split into two different supers. Blue was the more intellectual of the pair, and Red was more act now, waste time thinking later. The two supers did not see eye to eye and at a certain point flat out refused to join back into one person. Unfortunately for the characters, that was the only thing fans wanted, and soon they were pushed back together into one hero. The reason given in the comic was that Superman was able to return to normal when the electromagnetic energy dispersed. Batman is strong and powerful and rich, but that doesn't change the fact that he's just a guy with a regular skeleton, a regular spine that can be broken. Batman did have his back literally snapped by Bane. It was awful. Batman, even though he was just a regular human and got hurt plenty of times, he always seemed so powerful, like he could bounce back from anything. So breaking his back was a moment that became very iconic after it happened. The Nightfall arc of the early 1990s featured Bane truly trying his hardest to destroy Batman in every aspect he could. There was a major battle between Bane and Batman that left Batman worse for wear until it ended with Bane grabbing Batman and causing that serious act of harm, and then to top it off, he tossed the bat from the rooftop, but he couldn't fly, so it ended bad. Batman had no choice but to get out of the game for a while and have someone take up his mantle. That person was Jean-Paul Valley. Valley did good at first, but he was known for being violent and soon started breaking Batman's no-ending life rule, and that damaged Batman's reputation with James Gordon, the police, the public. It was a mess. Thankfully, Bruce is able to get back on his feet and heal up to defeat Valley, and the actual good Batman is back and better than ever, but this was probably the toughest era for Bruce Wayne.
For those of you that have been following along with Moon Knight, this might be a little less jarring for you, or perhaps if you were following along with the short-lived Blade series, we are right away thrown into the action where our heroes are up against what feels like an unstoppable force. They're forced to take on a unified world of vampires who also seem to have grown in number unexpectedly. These vampires aren't just swarming the earth, but they are also all seemingly united somehow. When it comes to the Dark Force dimension, it's not something that I think about on the regular when it comes to Marvel Comics, which is why I was really excited and really surprised to see it used in this story. In Blood Hunt, all Dark Force wielders are basically being used as a tool, as a gateway, to open up into the Dark Force dimension to flood the Earth with darkness, thereby blocking out the sun, which provides an opportunity for the vampires, of course, to attack. They attack all together, fully, seemingly organized under one leader or cause, but we don't know who or what that is. We don't know how they coordinated this attack, how it was all planned. It all happened so suddenly. How were they able to open up all these portals inside of Dark Force users? We just know they managed to do it. This does mean, sadly, that Cloak is one of the people who is caught up in all of this. Cloak is used as a portal to access the Dark Force dimension, being converted into just a pure portal of energy. So I guess we have to say rest in peace to all the other Dark Force related heroes and villains, or at least rest in peace for now. Not only am I sad to hear this in terms of Cloak, who I do like and I honestly think does not get enough love in the comics, but I'm also sad to hear this in regards to Shade, who's a mutant and a drag queen, and is also a hero who can teleport through the Dark Force dimension. Also doesn't get enough love in the comics. And if you were thinking to yourself, well, that doesn't sound so bad, I mean, we have magic users out there who can help with this, that can close the portals, the answer to that is no, we don't have that. At one point near the beginning of the story, Iron Man has a conversation with Scarlet Witch, where he's essentially asking Wanda to use her magic to just close the portals. But as Wanda explains, that's not the way it works. Just like how Tony can't do anything with his tech and his suit to do that. Wanda also is not able to solve this problem with just, her magical abilities here. Of course, while the whole world seems to be under siege in Blood Hunt, it might surprise you to learn that there are still some seemingly safe places on the planet Earth. Or at least you might not be surprised to hear that this place is safe, but you might be surprised to hear how intense the security is here. Or well, maybe you wouldn't when you realize that, yeah, we're talking about Latveria and we're talking about Dr. Doom. Still, I did find these panels a bit surprising in a fun way, in the sense that we just get to see people escaping into Latveria, who are of course running away from vampires. As soon as they step across that border in pursuit, those vamps get straight up flambéed. What's worse is that the people who trespassed into Latveria are now being welcomed in as citizens, basically forced to join up with this nation for fleeing there to get security. So while they are safe, they are now going to have to play by Latveria's rules. Dr. Doom is taking advantage of the situation to use it to boost his own population, it seems, recruiting people for the country. Honestly, I love this. It feels so Doom. Doom's like, I'll save you, but now you just have to bow down to me. Cool? While the events in regards to Latveria and Dr. Doom might not be as surprising to some, this next one is where I could not take my eyes off of this comic. This next one caught me so off guard because it's just something that happens so fast. This, after all, is just the beginning of Blood Hunt right now. We're just at the start of this event, so you wouldn't think we would go quite as hard as this, but that's what we're doing here. While the Avengers are there to respond and help Earth, they actually get pulled away momentarily by Blade, who says that he actually has some intel for them. He's gonna, help them out. He has some information and they all have to head up to the city, which is their current headquarters. For those that aren't aware, the city is basically a sentient city. It's floating. It's where the Avengers are based. Blade gets beamed up, all the Avengers get called in to have a quick meeting in the city, and that's when it's revealed that Blade is not actually on the truck that got beamed up. It was beamed up, but instead there are vampires in that truck. Vampires who belong to a group known as the Blood Coven. These are vampires who have fed on superpowered blood or supernatural blood and are using that to give them enhanced strength, enhanced abilities that make them extremely powerful foes. As a result, it seems as if the Avengers have met their matches, and most of them, well, almost all of them, are taken out in issue 1. This also extends to their headquarters because, yes, the city is sentient, which means that not only is it the base of the Avengers right now, but it's actually also like a member of the Avengers team. A little while ago, I did a list talking about some of the new Avengers members, and the city was actually one of the people that I discussed and put on that list because they did recently join up with the team, and the city is actually not a member that escapes the Avengers team fate here. They too end up being taken out. That's right, these vampires are so crazy they're able to take out a whole city. They corrupt, infect the city, and are able to prevent it to a certain extent from using its abilities. So when Black Panther tries to get it to do a dimension jump, it can't, and it's basically forced to surrender due to the pain that it also feels in this encounter. There is one person that survives this, and I think this will also surprise people a bit. The one person that manages to get away is maybe not the most powerful Avenger, let's say, but could actually be the most valuable Avenger in terms of what they represent to humanity. In a desperate attempt to save his fellow Avenger, Black Panther is actually able to get someone teleported off of the city. He's able to get Captain America out of here. The city might not be able to dimension hop, but apparently teleportation is still a thing that we can access here. Captain America ends up getting teleported to safety by Black Panther, who issues this as his last command, to have Sam teleported off before being stopped in his tracks and meeting his own seeming demise. Poor T'Challa. Why is Sam the one who is chosen to survive here? Well, that's interesting. You see, the Blood Coven really wants Sam because they want to turn him into a vampire so that he can basically be a symbol for the vampires. And they know that that will basically crush humanity, to see that they've, lost their symbol of hope, that they've lost Captain America. That's why Black Panther also chooses to save him with his last action before he meets his end, because he sees the value in Captain America and what he represents to humanity. Hope. So you might be getting a hint for where this is heading at this point, but you might also be thinking of a different person that could be behind all of this. This was a character I was expecting to be behind everything. A character, honestly, that I love in the comics. We're talking about Dracula. Unfortunately, Dracula is not home at this time. In fact, when Vision is able to tap into some information bases and search to see what could be going on and try to figure out, who's behind this, he actually notes that Dracula seems to be MIA. So when it comes to who's behind it all, it is definitely not Dracula. Dracula is not the person that we're looking for here. And I gotta be honest with you, I was a little disappointed that Dracula does not appear here, and that Dracula, we don't know where Dracula is. But at the same time, this is a vampire event, so I do feel like Dracula will show up eventually at some point in some capacity. I feel like he could even maybe team up with our heroes, and I have to say that the fact that this twist was so unexpected actually made me not miss him as much as I was expecting to. So how did this plan come to be? How did these Dark Force portals open up? Well, this does get explained in the issue, and apparently it's actually due to some Atlantean rituals? Which makes me wonder how this was something that the vampires found out about, and how they're able to use it, and what's going on with Atlantis. Are they working with anyone there? I'm just curious, or did they just, read a book? If anything, in regards to this event, I was just not expecting to see a reference to Atlantis here, but we went there. That's a thing. And finally, major spoilers for the setup of the Blood Hunt event and Blood Hunt issue number 1 here, but I would say probably the most unexpected thing that happened here was the reveal of who is actually behind all of this. Now, if you've been listening to this video, you might have gotten some ideas from some things I said. I did obviously spoil that the Avengers are taken out here. I feel like I didn't spoil anything that's actually a major twist. So I feel pretty safe that up until this point, the spoilers haven't really been the most spoilery that we could go. The spoilers that we gave here were, I would say, on the lighter to mid side. But this one is a big spoiler. It's final page, last panel reveal. So I'm just going to say it, but you have been warned. The person behind Blood Hunt, behind the start of this event, behind these vampires coming together, and this group that we know as the Structure from Moon Knight, and their new leader is Blade. And we learned this when Blade goes to talk to Doctor Strange and Clea and reveals to them that he knows the entire plan of what is happening here. He breaks it down before revealing that yes, Blade is the one who is behind it all and is the new leader of the Structure. He also does this, of course, while stabbing Doctor Strange right through his chest, which also is pretty shocking, I gotta say. I cannot wait to see where this event goes next and how we get out of any of this, but I gotta say with some of the punches that they're throwing here and just how hard they're throwing them, I'm very much intrigued to see what the creative team has in store for us moving forward.
Tony Stark was adopted! Surprise! Starting off with a bang. This shocking news was revealed in 2012's Iron Man 17. We also learned that Tony had a brother, as if he didn't have enough on his plate already. Tony and his relationship with his dad has never been stellar, but the news that he was adopted made the genius reevaluate everything he ever knew. Tony's brother is Arno. When Maria Stark was pregnant, Arno wasn't doing well, so the Starks did the normal thing here and accepted help from Alien 451. The help in question: get Arno to term, but in exchange he would genetically modify the baby to be able to one day wield the most powerful armor in the universe. Either way, the Stark boys ended up wielding powerful suits of armor. Howard Stark made his own modification modifications to Arno while he was in the womb, and those actually made his health decline. Alien 451 could not know that happened, so the Starks adopted Tony as a cover. That is so sad. Tony deserved a loving family, not being a cover-up story for an alien. Arno was kept away, and Tony was eventually brought up in the spotlight. Eventually Tony and the alien met up, and Tony was in this powerful suit, but it obviously didn't work. Tony had to investigate why. He's Tony Stark, and that's why he found out about his brother. Coming to terms with an island being a sentient mutant is already a big ask, but having said sentient mutant island get a girlfriend, it's borderline too much. Strap in everybody, this is about to get wild. So Krakoa, the now safe haven for mutants, got a girlfriend, Arakko, also a sentient island. Here's the thing though, Krakoa and Arakko used to be one human-shaped mutant called Akara. Akara eventually grew to the size of a massive island and then was split in half by the Twilight Sword. When that happened, a portal opened to Amenth, a place full of demons and bad things. One half of the island went there, Arakko, and the other half of the island stayed on Earth, Krakoa. They were separated for a long time. Then, Summoner was coming to Earth for a mission, but needed a piece of his realm as a transport, so he took part of the Arakko island, called it the Arak Coral. It was the Arak Coral that presumably mated with Krakoa. The entire island of Arakko stayed separate from Krakoa in the end. It was just the small piece that got involved. The most unexpected love story I have ever read. Wolverine being at point zero for the bombing of Hiroshima still shocks me. At this point, Wolverine is more important in the history of the human race than any major world leader. If you look at the background of any major event in recent history, Wolverine probably has something to do with it. What do you mean he was at the bombing of Hiroshima, and what do you mean he survived? Healing factor goes crazy. How did Wolverine end up at the location of the drop? Well, it was World War II, and Wolverine was captured by some Japanese soldiers and sent to jail. He escapes jail with this guy, Ethan Warren. He is a problem, we will cover that in a second. Wolverine gets romantically involved with a local girl after escaping, and he experiences peace for a short while, until Warren shows up and wrecks everything. He ends Wolverine's girlfriend, and Wolverine starts to fight him. It's a pretty intense fight that would need something pretty serious to stop it. Imagine my shock and surprise when that something was the bomb. Obviously, the city is destroyed, the fight is over, and the comic ends with Wolverine emerging from the wreckage, looking surprisingly not the worst he's looked, but it's in the top 5. Captain America joining the Avengers after being trapped in the ice feels like such an important part of the character's story. It's hard to believe that it was once a surprise. The character went into the ice in 1945 and was revived in 1964, but the comics featuring the Captain continued to be published in the 1950s, so what's going on? This was explained away in 1977 by another person taking over the Captain America mantle to keep the spirit of America alive. That person was William Nasland. All the Captain America stuff that happened when Steve was in the ice still happened, it was just this different guy, so Marvel successfully explained why they could bring Steve back in 1964's Avengers 4, and it would all still make sense in the timeline. According to the Avengers 4 comic, Steve Rogers was brought back because of fan mail. An avalanche of it demanded he return, so thank you to those fans. Marvel would not be Marvel without Steve Rogers. Peter Parker's parents being out of the picture is very central to his character, but one time they returned, and if that wasn't surprising enough, it was revealed that they weren't actually his parents, they were robot versions of his parents. It was the 90s, and that's all the explanation I will give. Moving on, I'm kidding. So, Amazing Spider-Man issue 365, Peter's parents. They are back in business. Welcome back, Richard and Mary Parker. No warning, no call to say they are dropping in, they just show up after resting peacefully for decades worth of comics. Turns out though, they weren't really Peter's parents, but robot versions of them. That was revealed 2 years after the parents were reintroduced, so Marvel kept this up for a while. The robots were sent by a villain named Chameleon because he wanted to figure out who Spider-Man was, and he figured that since Peter Parker gets all the best pictures of the web-slinger, he must know him personally. He was right. A wild plan, but at least he was right. The parents' robots had all the memories from the real Parkers and could simulate humans' emotions, and that programming led to Chameleon's downfall. He did too good of a job because Robot Mary actually started feeling feeling motherly affection towards Peter and ended up protecting him and his identity in the end. Remember that time that Jean Grey died but actually didn't die and was really preserved at the bottom of the ocean by the Phoenix Force? Wasn't that wild? Now this is just part of the history, part of the Marvel lore, but put yourself in the shoes of a reader from this time. This was big news. Jean Grey had sacrificed herself to stop the Dark Phoenix from returning. It was big, it was emotional, she literally passed away. She was going to stay 6 feet under, but then Marvel wanted her back to join a team of X-Men because they needed a girl on the team. Originally, that girl was going to be Dazzler, but that fell through and they wanted Grey instead. So now, instead of being 6 feet under, Grey was actually about 50 feet under the water in Jamaica Bay, kept perfectly safe from harm for all these years by the Phoenix Force so that it could have a proper host. Surprise! Then it was a surprise squared because Madeline Pryor also existed and she was a clone of Jean involved with Cyclops. Then when the real Jean showed up, Cyclops left her and that made him look really bad. It's hard to picture the Marvel Universe without Jean Grey, but this comeback did rock the boat in the 1980s. Franklin Richards not being a mutant anymore? What was that for? Just to make us suffer? Franklin is the son of Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman, and for a very long time he was a mutant. Not just any mutant, he was thought to be one of the most powerful mutants in the Marvel Universe. That's a big deal, and it's been that way since the kid was a toddler and saving the world. Everybody wanted Franklin on their side. I cannot blame them. The X-Men wanted Franklin on Krakoa. It makes sense. He was an incredibly powerful mutant, and they believed he should be around other people like him. Only his parents disagreed. They believed that since he was a child, he should be home with his family. I see both sides here, but the X-Men and the Fantastic Four got into a pretty big fight over it in Washington Square Park. People's cars were smashed, insurance was called. In this fight, we find out that Mr. Fantastic muted his son's mutanthood so that he couldn't cross into Krakoa, which permanently damaged that relationship. Then, when Franklin did end up on Krakoa after a number of fights with his parents, he made a bunch of friends and kind of started making a life for himself there. But surprise, LOL, it was for nothing. All those relationships and family drama and smashed parks for nothing. It was explained away by Franklin having powers so powerful that he was unconsciously making it appear he was a mutant, but when he lost his powers, he couldn't do that anymore and the truth was revealed he wasn't. Imagine that being your teen years. It's a good thing the Fantastics are rich because they are going to need an amazing therapist to help Franklin with all this. Spider-Man and Mary Jane's forceful divorce was so out of left field, it still rocks me to my core. So, in Spider-Man One More Day, Aunt May is really sick, bedridden, and the possibility of a funeral in the near future is high, so Peter is desperate to help her get better. Peter being unwilling to let go of the woman who took him in and raised him is not that surprising. That's a very normal feeling. It's the way Aunt May was saved. Instead of having a really interesting arc about Peter learning to deal with the grief of losing this important family member, Marvel went with the choice that Mephisto, who is not the devil, but that's the vibe, that Mephisto would save Aunt May in exchange for Peter and MJ's marriage. Bonkers choice. Turns out that there was probably an actual reason for doing this. It wasn't as random as it first appeared. Mephisto had a vision that Spider-Man's daughter was going to take him down in the future, so he figured that if he broke up Peter and MJ's marriage, the daughter would never be born and he would be fine. Good logic. Didn't work though. Another reason why this choice was made, to let writers explore Peter's character without having MJ there. The two have been together for a while, so doing this let the writers explore different stories that they might not have been able to if they were still married. Wanda and Pietro not being mutants and not being Magneto's kids. This topic has been brought up so many times on this channel, I almost want to do an official count, but literally, can you blame us? What was Marvel thinking? This is the kind of thing that you block someone for. For years, decades, Wanda and Pietro have been mutants and the twins of Magneto. Then one day, Uncanny Avengers Volume 2 drops and the Marvel Universe has never been the same. Wanda and Pietro are not mutants all of a sudden, and instead were twins stolen from the Maximoffs to be experimented on by the High Evolutionary, and that is why they have superpowers. That brings in the other big sore spot. If they were stolen twins from the Maximoff, then they aren't Magneto's kids. Marvel just broke up a family that has been around forever. Luckily, they did acknowledge the years of history by showing that even if Magneto isn't their biological dad, he will always be a father figure to them. So thank you for kissing that paper cut, Marvel. Still, it creates some plot holes, we know Magneto has twins because they were born, we saw it, so where are they? Magneto is one of the most powerful mutants out there, so his kids would probably be pretty powerful too. Are we to believe that they haven't been out wreaking havoc somewhere? Also, Magneto found one of his other kids when she used her magnetism powers and he sensed it, so were the actual twins born powerless? Is Marvel keeping this purposely in the dark so they can retcon this retcon? I wish I knew. This single panel of Captain America rocked the internet in a way I have not seen in all my years. The only reason this point beat out the Wanda and Pietro not mutants point was because I feel like it didn't just mean something to only Marvel fans, but also just like the general public. Everybody was talking about this. Twitter was having a meltdown. The America-loving king that Chris Evans brought to the screen suddenly saying, "Hail Hydra." Worlds were changed, breakdowns were had. Now we know that it wasn't actually Steve Rogers' Captain America, but a different Captain America raised in a different timeline, Flag Smasher. So we don't need to worry anymore, but when this dropped, I remember where I was. No one saw it coming because it completely goes against everything Captain America. It was truly the most out of character and out of pocket thing Cap could have said. Why in a million years would fans expect this? Bad stuff did still happen in the Hail Hydra universe. Spoiler alert, death of Agent Coulson was a hit to the heart. Deadpool getting roped in because of his blind alliance to the Captain. Messy, messy, messy. Eventually, the actual Captain comes back and takes care of business. Thank goodness.
Number 10. Black Mask. Black Mask was killed by Selena Kyle, aka Catwoman. She shot Black Mask point blank, killing him as revenge for what he'd done to those she loved and cared for, chiefly burning down a building in Selena's hood on the east side, which she was trying to help and was kinda under protection, and for hurting her sister Maggie in an irreparable way and basically driving her insane. However, surprisingly, this would not be the end of Black Mask. Black Mask would return as a Black Lantern during the Blackest Night event and would eventually even return to life, surprising many folks, Selena included. But I mean, Black Mask is so great. How can you just let that villain go? You can't, unless it's Birds of Prey, and then he's probably gone forever in the DCEU. Number 9. Mr. Sinister. One of the weirdest comebacks was when Mr. Sinister created a failsafe in the case of his death, which did inevitably happen. Sinister basically intended to come back via the mutant youth he had once experimented on, who are now all grown up. When this failed, he planned a backup for that backup. Claudine Ranko became Miss Sinister, but as startling as that transformation was, we were even more startled when Mr. Sinister suddenly returned through her, basically bursting out of her Miss Sinister form, overriding even his Miss Sinister, part Claudine, part Sinister self, and coming back entirely, at least for a few pages, until he could find a more permanent solution later on, when he would fully return via a clone. Also, he literally burst out of Miss Sinister, like literally was like, pop, here I am! It was weird and creepy and definitely super memorable. I know I found it shocking. I don't know if you found it shocking, but I did. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving our channel here on Top 10 Nerd, please go check us out over on Facebook, where we also have cool stuff, and we're also going to be having some exclusive things coming your way. In fact, at the time that this goes up, I think there will already be something super exclusive over there. You won't want to miss it, so make sure you are following us there as well. Number 8. Kite Man. Kite Man is often relegated to the C-list villains in the DC universe. He's often considered one of Batman's lamest villains, and yet via the Harley Quinn animated series, he saw a revitalization of his character, with him even getting a solid fan base due to how he was depicted in the show. I love when things like this happen to C-listers like Kite Man or Polka Dot Man, a lot of mans out there, or even characters like Peacemaker. Not a man, just well, he is a man, but isn't a man at the end of his name. All of these characters are lesser known and even less appreciated usually, but honestly, they all deserve to be hyped for certain reasons. I love characters that are C-listers, in case you didn't know. Kite Man, while an all-around good guy in the animated series, is still considered to be a villain in that animated universe, albeit still a C-list one. And yet this is what makes us love him so much. The fact that he is working hard to try and make a name for himself is kind of a huge part of why I think people just love him. That and the fact that he seems fairly comfortable with who he is, even though he isn't necessarily a top tier villain. And you know, he does know it. It doesn't mean that he doesn't try, and it doesn't mean that he is ashamed of who he is or his, his kite gimmick. He rocks it. Hell yeah, Kite Man. Hell yeah.
Coming in number 7, we've got Alfred Pennyworth. Not Alfred. The beloved butler to Bruce/Batman, brutally brought down by an evil edition of Papa Wayne. For what reason, you may ask? Well, this alternate version of Thomas Wayne wanted to teach Bruce a lesson. He found his way into the main DC universe with the intent to show Bruce how much pain and suffering being a hero would cause. So he killed Alfred, and nothing was ever the same. Taking out such a long-standing and integral supporting character is an enormous thing to do, and it all happened so quickly. One day, Alfred was here, the next, he was gone. This caused plenty of cascading changes too, from negatively affecting the mental state of all those who cherished Alfred to the increased reliance on Lucius Fox. Coming in number 6, we've got Captain Marvel. Now here's an odd send-off for a superhero. Instead of being bested in battle or sacrificing oneself for the greater good, Marvel was killed by something more folks might be able to relate to. It was cancer. The powerful and generous hero learned that he was ill and there wasn't much he could do about it. He learns that his past experiences exposed him to a highly volatile substance that gave him incurable cancer. From there, he does his best to be at peace with his dwindling lifespan and is visited by all sorts of people, both friend and foe, in one final send-off. The final figure that arrived was his longtime enemy and leader of the Skrulls, Thanos. He wasn't there to fight though, he was there to guide Marvel to the afterlife. It says a lot about a character when even their most bitter rival shows up at the end to lend a hand. Coming in number 5, we've got Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy had such a huge impact on Peter Parker and therefore Spider-Man that it's impossible to look past this shocking death. The implications of that final neck snap reverberated all throughout the comic community. There has been plenty of controversy over Spider-Man's attempt to save Gwen and whether or not he contributed to her death by catching her awkwardly. Was it his fault that he couldn't save her? What does that mean for Peter moving forward? How much of the blame can be placed on the Green Goblin? All very good questions, a few of which caused more than minor uproar. It was later revealed that Gwen died of shock on her way to the ground, so there was nothing the web-slinger could do regardless. But her death forever altered the way Peter Parker looked at the world, and I'd say a lot of fans feel the same way. Coming in number 4, we've got Superman. Now this was probably the apex of impactful superhero deaths. Not necessarily because of the actual impact of his passing, but the craziness that it caused everywhere. Like when folks learned of Superman's death in 1992, sales went through the roof. Until that point, Superman was invincible. He could not be beat, let alone killed. Sure, he'd had brushes with failure in the past, and there were times that he could not complete the tasks he needed to complete, but dying? Superman? Damn, Doomsday, your name is really apt. Even the follow-up issue sold like hotcakes, almost matching the sales of the death of Superman. That's how you keep folks invested, apparently. Kill off your hero. Coming in number 3, we've got Elektra. A whole decade before Superman bit the dust, we had another controversial, dark, and upsetting death in comics. The Assassin in Red, martial arts master and love interest of Matt Murdock, Elektra. After a brutal fight with Bullseye, Elektra is pierced through the chest and left to die. It was a wild move, especially for the time. Nobody expected this well-developed fan favorite to kick the bucket just like that, but that is exactly what happened. And it wasn't a half-assed death either. There was no coming back from it. When it happened, Elektra was dead and gone. Sure, she's made her way back into the rotation now in alternate universes and other comics, but in that run, she was gone. Coming in number 2, we've got Jason Todd. Oh boy. You could argue that people did see this one coming, as DC allowed fans to call in and vote for the outcome. It was up to the good folks at home to decide whether Robin would live or die, and in the end, they chose for him to die. That's brutal. After a drawn-out battle with the Joker, where poor Jason is beaten within an inch of his life, Batman almost pulls off the rescue. However, at the last moment, a bomb goes off and Robin tosses himself atop to stifle the explosion. There's no coming back from an injury like that. So thanks to the fans that voted for it, and some particularly fiendish storytelling, the Boy Wonder was no more. Ouch. And finally at number 1, we've got Barry Allen. Oh no. This is a tough one to stomach, that's for sure. After a lifetime's worth of genius brain power and speed beyond measure, it seemed that the Flash would never truly meet his match. Nothing lasts forever though, and when an antimatter cannon was being prepped for annihilation, he had to step up, and fast. So that's what he did. Barry created a speed vortex powerful enough to destroy the weapon and prevent it from causing any harm, but in doing so exerted too much energy. The force that he generated tore his own body apart, ending his life. The worst bit is, folks got to see his face break down to nothing as it was happening. It's a wild and disturbing image for sure. So by putting it all on the line to save the world, Barry lost it all.
Alright, number 10. Anti-Monitor. During the events of Forever Evil, the crime syndicate of America of Earth 3 invades the Prime DC universe, escaping the threat of their complete destruction back on their homeworld. For almost the entire comic event, the CSA all allude to the threat that destroyed their home and just how terrifying it is. The threat itself even makes a cut in the universal barriers, just trying to make its way into the Prime universe. After the CSA have been defeated in an awesome fight with Earth's villains, Superman speaks about how the threat they spoke of has to be Darkseid, and he begins preparing for Darkseid's return. But for us readers, we get to learn that the true enemy the CSA were running from was actually the incredibly powerful Anti-Monitor, who had destroyed almost all of Earth 3's reality. It's a cool reveal that leads straight into Darkseid War. Number 9. Ultron. Ultron is a villain that really just pops up over and over as he constantly reinvents himself in different ways. Now, one of his biggest reinventions was when he created an Age of Ultron, which became the name of the 2013 crossover series. Here, he finally achieved his goal of taking over the world. He created machines to hunt down anyone who failed to submit to his rule, with only a small group of heroes surviving and trying to oppose the Mad Ultron. He was finally brought down by a program planted in his design by his creator, Hank Pym, after a time-traveling Sue Storm and Wolverine warned Pym of the future threat Ultron would pose. There is also his whole character arc in the MCU's What If animated series as well, which was honestly really cool to watch, and I did not expect it to go the way it went. Number 8. Armless Tiger Man. You may be wondering who the heck Armless Tiger Man even is, and you know what? That's fair. Honestly, his return is not the only thing we never saw coming, because his creation was something I never saw coming. But here we are with a German amputee with pointy ears, sharpened teeth, and enough leg strength to bend steel. He had an incredibly brief career during World War II and was eventually taken out in Wakanda by one of the Howling Commandos. But what was really surprising was when he reappeared in Incredible Hercules number 129 to 131 in 2009. He was among a group of individuals that were the Greek god Pluto's jury of the undead, and they together put Zeus on trial and subdued Herc himself. If you guys are enjoying this video, or you like this channel, make sure you drop a like to let us know that you like what we're giving you.
Number 7. Kang the Conqueror. Kang the Conqueror is a staple villain when it comes to the Avengers team, but even still, he's not the first villain I think of when it comes to threats the Avengers might face in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's kind of a weird villain, and he's got a floating chair. It's weird. This is all part of the reason why I was surprised to hear that he was getting a revival, sort of, via the MCU, where he'd appear as a villain in Quantumania. Although even from that point on, I was one of the people speculating that his role in the MCU might be larger than just the Ant-Man and the Wasp film he was slated to star in. Especially when we heard that Jonathan Majors was going to be playing him, I was like, okay. You don't just do that and then make it like a one movie like blip of a villain. And so far, it would seem to many others' surprise, I and some others may have been right when it came to our speculation on Kang's role. An alternate version of Kang appeared in Loki known as He Who Remains. This version of Kang warned of many different versions of himself that were basically being held back due to his maintenance and pruning of the sacred timeline. He also warned that killing him would actually cause the timeline to splinter, allowing all these Kangs to have free roam of the multiverse, where many of them were not as chill as he was. And yeah, I don't think they're gonna be as chill. Kang the Conqueror, here we go. Number 6. Pariah. Pariah recently made a surprising comeback in the comics when he destroyed all of the Justice League, or well, like almost all of the Justice League. You've heard of the recent story Death of the Justice League. Well, yeah, that was Pariah. Although Pariah was once a scientist and fairly good man, he was driven mad when he learned that the multiverse was ending during the lead up to Crisis on Infinite Earths, way back in the day. He tried to warn people that it was coming, but people did not want to listen to him. Now, once more, he's in a similar position. In a desperate attempt to prevent another crisis from cyclically destroying everything, this time Dark Crisis, he decided to kill all the heroes, believing that in doing so, he would basically prevent the cycle from continuing that would lead to the destruction of the multiverse. It's a pretty crazy idea, but at this point, Pariah is a pretty crazy guy. Although it makes sense that he would be part of the catalyst for another crisis, DC fans were still surprised to see him return once more in modern comics. I think we were also all surprised that there's going to be another crisis, considering the last one was called Final Crisis. Not so final. final, turns out. Number 5. Inheritors. A whole group of villains that I think everyone was fairly surprised to see return again were the Inheritors. This is because the Inheritors were firmly defeated in the previous Spider-Verse event. However, because Spider-Verse was such a massive success, Marvel decided to let the Inheritors return for the next one, Spider-Geddon. And we still have another third chapter of this continuous event headed our way, said to be the end of the Spider-Verse trilogy that will be known as, aptly, the end of the Spider-Verse. At least until we decide to, open that Spider-Verse back up again, because, things end, things are final, and then not so much. I have no doubt that the Spider-Verse will come back eventually. The Inheritors are a group of space energy vampires permanently frozen in time when it comes to their style, stuck in sort of the Gothic Victorian era. I love it, but not everybody is here for it. They were defeated and killed at the end of Spider-Verse, but miraculously came back via Superior Spider-Man's tech when he decided to combine their DNA to basically make a clone body for himself should he perish. Using his tech, all the Inheritors were able to return as clones themselves, causing all the spider totems across the multiverse to rejoin once more during Spider-Geddon to take them out again. And then they became little baby versions of themselves, which I love. And also I feel like the Inheritors, baby Inheritors, should get their own book. I said it. Number 4. Flashpoint Joker. The Flashpoint version of Joker is actually Bruce Wayne's mother, Martha Wayne. In the Flashpoint continuity, young Bruce is the one who perished during the mugging as opposed to his parents. Suffering greatly from the loss of their young son, Thomas turned to the path of vengeance, whereas Martha became extremely depressed and ultimately lost her mind, turning to the path of chaos. In the Flashpoint reality and timeline, Thomas becomes Batman and Martha becomes his Joker. Recently in the comics, during Flashpoint Beyond, Flashpoint Joker has made a surprising return, appearing from within the walls of Arkham Asylum. How she got there? Well, we're gonna have to wait and see. What we do know is that she was the one behind the murders of influential characters from the Flashpoint universe. The last we saw of Flashpoint Joker, Martha died drowning in a river, sacrificing herself after learning that in the main continuity, the Joker was the main nemesis to Batman, who in that reality of course was Bruce Wayne, her son, who was alive in that reality. The Flashpoint continuity was reset though recently, with Thomas Wayne's Batman remembering everything that happened previously and trying to solve the mystery of how it all reset. And also solve the mystery of, why all these Flashpoint people were dying. Turned out, it was Martha in the walls of Arkham for some reason. We don't know why. Number 3. Cassandra Nova. Cassandra Nova recently made a comeback in the Marauders series, a surprising one too, when she was needed to help solve a mutant mystery revolving around the existence of the very first mutants, hidden from the Earth mutant history apparently, and then later was invited to join the Marauders team by team leader Captain Kate Pryde. A lot of mysteries needing to be solved, and a lot of surprising villain comebacks in relation to those mysteries. At first I wasn't just startled to see Cassandra Nova, I was downright confused, but I gotta say, over the last few issues, her return has grown on me, and I'm kind of here for it. I never would have expected to see Cassandra Nova return, definitely not in a heroic sense either, not with a hero team. Krakoa may be for all mutants, but some wouldn't even consider Cassandra to be a mutant, at least not in the traditional sense, because she's a Mumadrai, but whatever. She's a mutant, she's part of the crew now, I would say. Number 2. Gaggy. This was one that even caught me by a delightful surprise during the Three Jokers story. While I still am not sure if we know where this story falls in continuity, in or out of continuity, it's still a really awesome read that brought back a villainous sidekick of old that I didn't know how much I really missed until I saw him return. Gaggy is Gagsworth A. Gagsworthy, an old school sidekick of the Jokers from way back in the day, back in the 60s, before he was ever with Harley Quinn. In fact, at one point Gaggy also returned to get revenge on Harley for taking his place at Joker's side, but that happened I believe during Gotham City Sirens, another cool comeback moment for the gangster. In Three Jokers, however, Gaggy returns as one of the Three Jokers' sidekicks. However, his comeback is short-lived, as he ends up being devoured by a Joker shark. R.I.P. Gaggy. He came back and then he died. Number 1. Rakil. I don't know how we say this name. It's Skrull, so I don't speak Skrull. I'm sorry. Need to learn how to speak Krakoan and Skrull. Got it. Raquel was a really weird comeback, so unexpected that it left everyone who was reading Marvel Comics at the time going, who? Huh? What's happening? Who is that? Even I had to look her up myself. Raquel was Empress of the Skrull Empire, who was believed dead for years. When Galactus came to devour the main homeworld of the Skrull at the time, Tarnax 4, Raquel was believed to have perished with it. However, we later learned during the Empire event a few years ago that she had actually survived the death of this world and had been living undercover as the Kree soldier T'Nalth the Pursuer. Her return was a major surprise to readers because she had been dead since the 80s, so before I was even born. So I was like, who dis? I don't know. So unless you'd been reading comics for that long, or you really knew your Fantastic Four comic book history in terms of what went down back then, you were likely confused by her appearance too. Which is alright, because you know what? We got the internet, and we got piles of comics that we can sift through. Although I think all of us collectively, no matter if we were familiar or not with Raquel, were surprised by her return. Even if you did know who she was, you'd be like, wait, what? I thought she was dead.
We're looking at Miles Morales. Has this kid suffered enough? No. I mean, in the first film, his uncle turned out to be a pretty big criminal and then died, but it gets worse, don't worry. Pretty shortly after discovering he was never even supposed to be a Spider-Man, that he's actually just a mistake in the timeline, Miles gets thrown into a parallel universe in which the Miles there is a villain that may or may not want to kill good Miles' dad, or maybe even him. Follow that? If you want answers, I do apologize, but this was kind of a plot twist that makes the audience suffer as much as the character. It's a cliffhanger that we have to wait until later this year to be resolved. That's the hero movie release I'm most excited for, but let us know in the comments which one you're looking forward to.
Speaking of villains, this next point is about a character whose origin was changed to make her just kinda that. Although, you know, she was a hero to start with, at least so we thought. Donna Troy is typically known to be the kid sister of Wonder Woman, often seen as her good friend and confidant. Someone whom Diana can trust, who either grew up with the Amazons since the beginning or who was adopted by them at a young age. This is why it was so surprising when it was revealed that she was created as part of a plot of Villainous to get revenge on her ex, Hippolyta, by having Donna become Hippolyta's heir instead of the intended Princess Diana, aka Wonder Woman. Yeah, Villainous had it out for Hippolyta because, well, she lost her youth and then Hippolyta left her and she was just basically like, girl, why'd you leave me like that? Of course, this origin would once again later be changed for Donna, reverting Donna back to an infant from Man's World whom Diana saved from a burning building. Which honestly, I gotta say, I kinda like better, because otherwise, poor Donna.
Nick Fury's reveal in Captain America the Winter Soldier is one of my personal favorite MCU twists. Pretty earlier on in the film, we the audience find out that S.H.I.E.L.D., the main intelligence organization in the MCU, is corrupt. That's not the plot twist. That comes when the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury, gets shot in Captain America's apartment. He is actually a good guy, he was just trying to warn Cap about the corruption. He succeeded, but at what cost? He was shot by the Winter Soldier and later died in surgery, or so we thought. Nick Fury is always 200 steps ahead and of course planned it all out. He used a substance that slowed his heart to 1 beat per minute, so he could die and then hide away in a safe house until it was time for him to help save the day again.
This next character has also come back from the dead before, but we aren't talking about Death of Superman this time around, although that was also pretty surprising, I think, for people. Superman is an iconic hero in the comics, not just when it comes to his appearance, but also honestly when it comes to his power set. We all know what he looks like, and we know what his power set is, right? Well, we think we do anyway. There was a period in the comics where Superman had a completely different look. The look was so different and caught so many people off guard that it was honestly quite short-lived. Yep, we're talking about Superman Blue and of course, later, Superman Red. This is when Superman got energy-based powers and we learned that he'd split into 2 different beings, with Superman Blue being more cerebral and Superman Red being more a man of action. And if you're wondering if I'm talking about the first time this happened in the classic comics, no, I'm talking about the 90s. As Superman's 60th anniversary was coming up, DC apparently wanted to do something different with the character, which is in part why we got this very drastic redesign for him. It was so polarizing that it lasted not even a full year, and the reasoning for the 2 Supermen rejoining was left kind of vague.
Nick Fury has a talent for making audiences' jaws drop. Just half a decade ago, he shocked MCU lovers after not being in Spider-Man Far From Home. Throughout the film, Nick Fury is a pretty important guy. He recruited Spider-Man to fight the Elementals, later revealed to be another MCU plot twist, and had a pretty iconic line about space. Q gasps when in a post-credit scene it was revealed that Fury was never actually on the scene. Turns out he wasn't even on Earth. Instead, he was up in space commanding a group of Skrulls. But he was still involved with Spidey telling the fake Skrull Fury down here what to do. This reveal was especially shocking because at this point fans didn't know how long Nick Fury wasn't really Nick Fury, or if Nick Fury was ever coming back down to Earth. Personally, after everything this man has been through, a bit of vacation time is deserved.
You know who else deserves a break? Batman. Batman very rarely gets close to getting his happy ending in the comics. I assume this is because in comics we think that heroes can't be happy and still be interesting. I'm looking at you, Dan Didio. I don't necessarily think that that's true myself, but I will say there does always need to be an element of drama at play. In this case, however, Batman ended up with both. No happy ending and honestly a ton of drama. Bruce Wayne had met and fallen in love with prominent socialite and kind of world leader Jezebel Jet. For a while the two dated and it seemed like things were getting pretty serious, honestly. However, just when it looked like Bruce might actually pop the question or even reveal the truth that, he was Batman, Jezebel revealed her cards and we learned that she had been working in secret all along for the Black Glove and was plotting to basically help kill Batman. Of course, good luck getting the jump on the Dark Knight though. He revealed, much to also readers' surprise, at least to my surprise, that he had known about her true allegiances all along and her plans, and it was actually she who had been playing into his hand, apparently. Although if you knew all along, Bruce, why'd you even get with her? I don't understand. I guess, hey, the best way to beat a criminal is to date a criminal.
Now I won't leave you hanging over here. I did just briefly mention another Spider-Man plot twist, and that is the subject of the Elementals. These were massive, extremely destructive monsters made of, you guessed it, natural elements. Think like if a tornado or volcanic eruption was sentient? Yeah, it was bad. These things destroyed part of Mexico and Europe, so they had all the makings to be a villain that our teenage Spider-Man might need some help defeating. Enter Mysterio. We all wanted him to be a good guy, but no, turns out the Elementals were fake. They were illusions created by Mysterio using drones to project scary images and wreak havoc. This entire thing might have come as an extra shock to comic lovers because the Elementals actually do exist in the comics, though their reign was long before Spider-Man's time. Still, it would have been perfectly reasonable for them to make an iconic comeback for the film. As for Mysterio's reasoning, well, former boss Tony Stark, Iron Man, you may have heard of him, called Mysterio's life work at Stark Industries a silly name, and from that point on, he decided to ruin Tony's legacy. At one point, he was just a regular scientist, though.
If you thought the reveal of Mysterio was wild, just wait till you hear about this next one. Batman stories are full of twists and turns, and some of them are better than others. Initially, I'd say I felt pretty mixed about this one, but in the end, it did bring me around. We're talking about the reveal that Damian Wayne was the son of Bruce and Talia. It was a shocking reveal, that's for sure, for readers and for, honestly, Batman himself, who was only made aware of Damian's existence after he was dropped on Bruce's doorstep by Talia. At that point as well, Damian was already a young child, so this was a secret Talia had been keeping from him for apparently years. There's also the whole issue of how exactly Damian was conceived, with Grant Morrison rewriting the no longer considered canon encounter and offspring the two had in Son of the Demon. Like I said, I like the Son of the Demon version of that story better, but yeah, I've come to accept Damian, so that's where I'm at.
We've had betrayals across the board today, but none had cut an audience quite as deep as when Captain America uttered the words, "Hail Hydra." If you were a Marvel fan on the internet in May of 2016, that was probably a big day for you. Making the rounds on social media was a single comic panel, Captain America saying, "Hail Hydra." Shocking, because one thing about Cap, he hates Hydra, would fight any member of Hydra, no questions asked kind of vibe. Plus, Hydra is a criminal organization, generally not liked. Fans were heartbroken and confused to say the least, many even vowing to ignore this comic set until it all blows over. To those who maybe couldn't stomach the read, don't worry, this Cap isn't the one we know. He was actually a Cap raised in an alternate timeline. He played the part of Captain America in the universe we are used to, but when our good Captain returned, he put an end to his terror.
This final point was a betrayal on my eyes. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are two heroes that we are used to seeing team up together. Initially in the comics, they're sister-brother twins that started off as villains, working alongside Magneto and his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, after they found themselves indebted to the master villain. However, over time, they would learn the error of their ways and both end up as team members of the Avengers, working more in a heroic capacity together. Being siblings, they both obviously care deeply for one another, and in one reality, this sibling affection went even further than we're used to. If you know, then you know. And for those who don't know, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I'm talking about the Ultimates comic line and universe, or 1610, where the two of these heroes and siblings ended up together romantically as well. A twist that none of us were expecting and that none of us really asked for, but there it is. We got it anyways. Iron Man being revealed as a sleeper agent for Kang was really unexpected, because it was about as random as it sounds. How? When? Why? These are all questions that folks had at the time, and not all of them were satisfactorily answered. This was because the story had moments where it even contradicted itself. If you want to check it out, at your own peril of course, you can find it as part of the Crossing event. There are moments after the reveal where even Iron Man himself seems to struggle to remember that he is actually one of the bad guys here. It was a twist even he never expected, I imagine. But I guess if you are a sleeper agent, that makes sense. You wouldn't expect it because you never knew that you were evil. It was deep, it was repressed. Technically, he wasn't working for Kang directly, but instead he'd been influenced by Immortus, who is an alternate timeline version of Kang the Conqueror. Not a sleeper agent, but a person we weren't expecting to secretly be a villain, I'll say that much. This next point also involves a hero that wasn't really what he seemed. Although unlike Iron Man, his history as a hero wasn't as established or well known in the comics. He was quite a bit more mysterious. So maybe we should have expected this. Baphomet is a hero who ends up befriending Batman, even becoming so trustworthy of an ally that Bruce reveals his true face to Baphomet and even brings him to the Batcave. This ended up being a mistake on Batman's part, as Baphomet used this opportunity to drop his disguise so he could attack and kill the woman Bruce loved the most at the time, his fiancée, Silver St. Cloud, revealing himself to not truly be the hero Baphomet, but instead the villain Automatopoeia. Another villain plot twist that I know I personally was not expecting comes from the Batman camp. It's pretty twisted though, because Joker this time around doesn't actually target Batman or Gotham, but instead sets his sights on an even more godlike hero, Superman, and his city of Metropolis. What Joker was thinking here, I honestly have no idea. I don't know how he thought he could just come out of this attack, if it was successful, especially alive. But you know, maybe that was all part of his plan. Maybe he didn't expect nor want to come out alive. Well, he certainly didn't end up doing that. I'll tell you that much. In the Injustice reality, Joker and Harley Quinn team up to trick Superman into thinking Doomsday has returned. This causes Superman to go into a paranoid rage, fighting against Doomsday, who is later revealed to have been actually Lois. Oh no. But Superman was simply made to hallucinate Lois as Doomsday, which is how this all happened. In addition, Joker and Harley used this distraction to blow up Metropolis, causing Superman to kill Joker during his interrogation and renounce his former peaceful ways, becoming a superhero dictator who refuses to tolerate the state of the world any longer, basically forcing it into a totalitarian time of peace. Speaking of destructive villains, Galactus is known for being a destroyer on a much greater scale, I would say, than the Joker. He's a world destroyer, and the last thing I'd ever expect to see him doing is creating life. Hence why this twist involving him was so surprising. It wasn't your typical villain twist either, as it didn't have to do with him tricking someone or devising the end of a planet or a universe. It was actually kind of just the opposite. This Galactus, of course, was an alternate version who was basically forced back into an egg to incubate for longer than he had when he became Galactus, when Galen became Galactus. It was suggested that this was why Galactus was a destroyer, because he basically just wasn't fully cooked when he came into the world. So that's why he ended ended up being a bad guy. Kind of like a Pandora's box scenario, you know? Like you open Pandora's box and all the bad stuff comes out, but then you close it because you're scared. But really, you should have just kept that open for longer because there was good stuff underneath. The plan worked, and after a little bit of extra time in his egg, Galactus instead emerged not as the world devourer, but instead as the life bringer, a creator of worlds instead of a destroyer and devourer of them. Moving on, Grail recently made a surprising reappearance in the comics. We haven't seen her for a while, and she is one of my favorite Wonder Woman villains. She's the daughter of an Amazon assassin, Myrna, and new god Darkseid. She's pretty epic. She's basically like the opposite of Wonder Woman. While she is a great Wonder Woman villain, it was pretty cool and unexpected to see her agree to work with other fellow Wonder Woman villains at the behest of the Sovereign and the United States. And if you want to catch more Grail action, you gotta go check out the new Wonder Woman series, Wonder Woman from 2023 by Tom King. It's really good. At least so I hear. I hear it's really good. Everything that I've seen in it looks really good. I gotta add it to my pull list, and I gotta catch up and read all of it. While Khonshu has never particularly been known as the most gracious, kindest, or compassionate of gods, he is usually an ally to Moon Knight. And while Moon Knight isn't always a perfect cookie-cutter hero, he is ultimately a hero, except for this time around. That's because Khonshu made Mark into an antagonist when he sought to defeat Mephisto, who he claimed was basically attempting to take over the Earth. So he was like, Mark, you gotta help me, we gotta beat Mephisto, just trust me. The problem was that Khonshu got Mark to gather the Avengers' weapons and items of power, hoping to use them to defeat Mephisto, so that he could basically rule Earth himself. Next up, one of my favorite reveals of all time, especially in regards to the MCU, not only because it was fairly unexpected, even as someone who has a pretty good handle on who Agatha Harkness is and what she's capable of, but because it has to be the catchiest villain reveal ever. While we all had many theories for who was the great villain in WandaVision, other than maybe Wanda herself to an extent, other theories were simply just more popular than Agatha being the one behind it all. I mean, we all knew it was probably Agatha Harkness there, we all knew that, but to think that she was the mastermind, not a lot of us were expecting that, to be fair. Agatha, while sometimes a villain, is more well known as an ally in the comics, so for it to be revealed that she was actually the one behind it, that it had been Agatha all along, that caught us by surprise. Over at DC Comics, we have another usually ally who instead was revealed to be a villain. Perhaps not the whole time, but definitely upon his return. Jason Todd was a character that we never expected to see again, so his coming back at all was pretty shocking. For a while there, it was implied that Jason would be Hush, and in fact, that was the initial intention for the Hush reveal in the comics. Fun fact. And this might have been one of the few indications to fans that DC Comics was maybe thinking about planning his return. Jason Todd came back to Batman's world not as a former ally and Robin, but instead as just the opposite, a villain, who blamed Batman for the fact that the man who nearly killed him was still on the loose. Of course, that man being the Joker. As such, Jason Todd had a different approach to vigilantism once he returned that made him a villain at the start, and more of an anti-hero, I'd say, as he's evolved. Heroes becoming villains is one thing, but what about when villains become heroes? Or disguising themselves as heroes, at least. When it comes to Spider-Man alternates, we have a lot of them, it's true. But one that I would have never expected to see is a version of Spider-Man who was a straight up villain. Or, scratch that, a version of Spider-Man who was just straight up one of his most iconic villains, Dr. Octopus. But that is what we got with this story arc. Doc Ock's body was failing and he managed to convince Peter to visit him before he shuffled off this mortal coil. However, this of course was a trap, and Otto used this opportunity to swap bodies with the young Spider-Man. As a result, Spider-Man's mind ended up in Doc Ock's failing body, and Doc Ock's mind ended up in Peter's much younger and powerful one. Surprise, surprise. This was how Dr. Octopus was able to defeat death, but tragically, Spider-Man actually did end up dying here, even more surprising. Or at least he died at the time. His consciousness would actually still live on somewhat, as it existed to some extent within his body, and later on, Otto would relinquish Spider-Man's body back to the consciousness of Peter, which was left remaining inside his physical form. Basically got stronger as time went on, and then eventually Otto was like, you know what? Maybe you should just be you, and I'll just be me. We'll just go our separate ways. Superior Spider-Man, out. Not quite as dramatic as a body swap, but still pretty dramatic. I really really love this next one. And I think for many of us, this twist caught us completely by surprise. Might be the most twisty reveal we've ever had. In fact, this twist and character became so iconic that she made her way from the animated universe to the comic book one. Yeah. Have you guessed it yet? Yeah, I'm talking about Andrea Beaumont, and the reveal that she was actually the Batman antagonist, Phantasm. Andrea Beaumont was introduced to us as one of Bruce's old flames, who he actually almost ended up settling down with back in the day. She knew Bruce better than most others, but that is also what made it such a great and compelling reveal and twist, because it also then kind of made sense that Phantasm was such a great foil for Batman, because she was someone that knew Bruce so well, so kind of works out, kind of makes sense. Starting off with a very unexpected twist, none of us were entirely sure if Catwoman and Batman were ever going to be allowed to end up together permanently in the main continuity. But when the wedding of the two characters was announced, that seemed exactly what we would actually be getting, which we were pretty hyped about. Of course, in the end, Selena did decide to play the role of runaway bride and break off the engagement, leaving a letter for Bruce. But while that was also surprising, the real twist was actually in finding out that Catwoman ditching Batman at the altar was all a part of a larger plan belonging to Bane. And even worse, Holly Robinson, Selena's good friend, was actually in on this plot. Bane had returned to Gotham, planning this time to break Batman's mind and his heart instead of just his body. Next up, this has to be one of the most shocking twists of all time in the comics, and it comes to us from Marvel. What twist surprised you the most? See if you can guess what this next one I'm about to share is. Hint, it's from Marvel. That's what you know. Put those guesses in the comments now. Let me know your thoughts as well. The Thunderbolts were a team that upon their first appearance were shrouded in mystery. They appeared to be a team of largely unknown heroes who were being set up to become a new premier superhero team in Marvel Comics, kind of akin to the Avengers. Somehow Marvel managed to keep the truth of their identity a secret until the release of their very first issue. In Thunderbolts issue number 1, at the very end, it's actually revealed that this team of new heroes aren't actually heroes at all, but instead are villains. Specifically, the Masters of Evil team, as led by Citizen V, who of course is really Baron Helmut Zemo. The plan here was to pose as heroes and basically slowly use their influence and adoration to conquer the world. A reveal made even more impactful when you consider these were the same villains who had actually almost killed members of the Avengers team in their attack on Avengers Mansion about a decade prior. And if you thought that last one was unbelievable, wait till you hear about this twist. You'd think when you've lost your face and then you've been thrown into basically a bottomless pit, that would be the end for you as a character. But apparently, that's just not the case if you're the Joker, who honestly survives a lot of stuff for being just a human guy. How did this happen? Well, it has to do with the fact that the pit the Joker falls into happens to end in a small pool of water that's really a liquid metal known as Dionysium, the same kind of liquid metal used in Lazarus pits and that is tied to Vandal Savage's powers. The Dionysium Joker fell into saved his life, healing his face and giving him somewhat of a healing factor for a while anyways. This was how Joker was able to return in the Endgame story, not to be confused with the MCU Endgame, which is a completely different thing altogether, in case you were wondering. While Joker may have some surprising tricks up his sleeve, he doesn't have anything on this next villain's surprising twist. If anyone is going to do anything to surprise us, of course, it's gotta be Loki. Loki has long been known as the god of tricks, and even though he's now known as the god of stories, that doesn't mean he hasn't done some crazy stuff in the past, and that he won't do some crazy stuff in the future. I'm sure he will. One of the craziest things he's ever done? Pretend to be the Scarlet Witch. Yeah, this was around a time when Loki had actually adopted a female form, and Wanda was actually missing, so both of those things made it easy for Loki to impersonate the powerful Avenger. Eventually, however, Loki's trickery was exposed, and the Avengers and Young Avengers worked together to defeat the trickster god. That just goes to show you that not every hero or villain is what they seem, and the same could be said of this next villain.
And in at number 7 is Superboy Prime. During the massive Dark Knight's Metal event, the trinity of Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman go to a collection of 3 dark multiverse worlds that each have the 3 main crises from DC Comics happening on repeat. Only each of these worlds' crises are happening differently than they were supposed to. Wonder Woman ended up in the world where the Infinite Crisis is constantly on repeat. Only in this world, the heroes lost and Wonder Woman is met by Superboy Prime, who hasn't shown up in the DC universe for quite some time now. Now, he isn't entirely a villain, like he definitely has been, but he has always wanted the best outcome, but usually in the worst ways possible. But now, in this death metal event, he fights toe-to-toe against the Batman Who Laughs and seemingly destroys him. Or does he? Number 6. Villainous. The Eternal known as Villainous first ever appeared in Marvel What If number 24 in September of 1980, in a story that explained the origins of the Eternals. Now in this story, Villainous is trying to convince his brother Kronos that the Eternals should use their massive amounts of power to take over the world. He believed the Eternals would best fulfill their duties if they exterminated both the deviants and humans on Earth, all life outside the universe, and then imprison the Celestials, but his brothers Kronos and Oceanus disagreed, sparking the Eternals' civil war. The war culminated in his defeat and banishment to the planet Uranus. Surprise though, this isn't actually what happened. The Villainous who was banished to another planet was actually a clone, and the real Villainous was banished to the Exclusion, which is where Thanos and Druig go in the recent Eternals The Heretic story from 2021. Here we are introduced to a very different looking Villainous who becomes the weapon of Druig against the mutant population in the Judgment Day event. Number 5. Magneto. Speaking of the Judgment Day event, in the X-Men Red comics, the story actually featured a whole Magneto comeback all of its own, which was incredibly awesome, and I think it deserves a mention. Magneto isn't really a full-on villain anymore. He has an incredibly complex moral compass, which makes him more like an anti-hero than anything else. He's a fan favorite, which is why it was incredibly hard to watch him get his heart completely ripped out of his chest by Villainous during Judgment. After Villainous had completely decimated the population living on Mars though, Magneto reveals that he is actually still alive, using his powers to control the iron in his own blood to keep his blood flowing. He used his power to carry on surviving without a heart. It's completely insane and totally awesome. Number 4. Dr. Doom. In 2009's Fantastic Four number 566, Dr. Doom reveals that he had actually learned everything he knows from one incredibly powerful reality warping villain called the Marquis of Death. Doom also dropped the little tidbit that the Marquis would be showing up. Only when the Marquis did show up with his new apprentice, he was less than happy with the progress Doom had made on Earth, and he attacked. The Marquis warped reality, made Doom think he had won, then snatched the victory away, set him on fire, turned his heart to stone and his blood to acid, then sent him back in time to the Pliocene age to be eaten by megalodons. The Marquis goes on to fight the Fantastic Four, almost beating them, and then, when the Marquis is on his last legs, his apprentice shows up and straight up slaps and destroys him, but not before revealing that he is actually Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom survived being eaten by a megalodon, gained enough power and dark magic to completely change his form, he became the Marquis' apprentice again, and even defeated Uatu the Watcher so he wouldn't be discovered. All of that to get his revenge and finally defeat the Marquis of Death. Number 3. Vulcan. We're going back to the X-Men Red story yet again. I'd say I'm sorry, but I kinda love this story, so I'm not. How everything happens is still being somewhat explained, but what we do know is that Vulcan is being used as a pawn on a chessboard by Abigail Brand, the director of S.W.O.R.D., which is like S.H.I.E.L.D. but in space. So basically, on the planet Mars is a mutant population called the Iraqi, and they are pretty combat focused. They decide who makes up their governing council with trial by combat. Well, when Vulcan made a play to make it onto that council in issue 3, he was very much defeated. Like, it seemed like he passed away. But it turns out that Abigail Brand either resurrected him through the mutant resurrection protocol or helped heal him, as in issue number 9 of the comic, he shows up out of nowhere again and is essentially challenging the Empress of the Shi'ar Empire, believing himself to still be their emperor like he was all those years back. Number 2. Starro. Sometimes when villains return, they don't always go back to their villainy, and they don't always come back in the way you might expect. The intergalactic conqueror known as Starro has been an enemy of the Justice League for years. He has given them a run for their money many times, and since he's been around so long, he has danced around with his morality. Well, Starro was eventually defeated, and he pretty much perished. Sort of. Batman seems to have taken a part of this giant starfish and put it under his care to assist him and the Justice League with its incredible psychic capabilities. This new creation is called Jarro, and he is awesome. Starro himself isn't actually completely gone, as we find out a bit later, but Jarro just wants to make his dad, aka Batman, proud. He even dresses up as a Robin to try to be the best Robin ever. It's fantastic. And in at number 1, Sinestro. Sinestro is Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps' greatest enemy. He was imprisoned in the Central Battery on Oa during the events of Emerald Twilight, where Hal Jordan went completely bonkers. In a last-ditch effort to defeat him, the Guardians released Sinestro in an attempt to stop Hal Jordan from destroying the Corps, and their battle was brutal. It eventually came down to a bare-knuckle fistfight, and Sinestro drove Jordan to go over the edge and snap Sinestro's neck, taking him down permanently. But this is a list of returns. So, in the later retcon, it was revealed that the Sinestro that Jordan snapped was really a light construct, and that Sinestro and the Parallax entity were actually the ones responsible for Hal Jordan's descent into villainy. So now, all the Hal Jordan fans can rest assured their hero is still squeaky clean. And honestly, a really cool return for a really awesome villain.
Iron Man being revealed as a sleeper agent for Kang was really unexpected, because it was about as random as it sounds. How? When? Why? These are all questions that folks had at the time, and not all of them were satisfactorily answered. This was because the story had moments where it even contradicted itself. If you want to check it out, at your own peril of course, you can find it as part of the Crossing event. There are moments after the reveal where even Iron Man himself seems to struggle to remember that he is actually one of the bad guys here. It was a twist even he never expected, I imagine. But I guess if you are a sleeper agent, that makes sense. You wouldn't expect it because you never knew that you were evil. It was deep, it was repressed. Technically, he wasn't working for Kang directly, but instead he'd been influenced by Immortus, who is an alternate timeline version of Kang the Conqueror. Not a sleeper agent, but a person we weren't expecting to secretly be a villain, I'll say that much. This next point also involves a hero that wasn't really what he seemed. Although unlike Iron Man, his history as a hero wasn't as established or well known in the comics. He was quite a bit more mysterious. So maybe we should have expected this. Baphomet is a hero who ends up befriending Batman, even becoming so trustworthy of an ally that Bruce reveals his true face to Baphomet and even brings him to the Batcave. This ended up being a mistake on Batman's part, as Baphomet used this opportunity to drop his disguise so he could attack and kill the woman Bruce loved the most at the time, his fiancée, Silver St. Cloud, revealing himself to not truly be the hero Baphomet, but instead the villain Automatopoeia. Another villain plot twist that I know I personally was not expecting comes from the Batman camp. It's pretty twisted though, because Joker this time around doesn't actually target Batman or Gotham, but instead sets his sights on an even more godlike hero, Superman, and his city of Metropolis. What Joker was thinking here, I honestly have no idea. I don't know how he thought he could just come out of this attack if it was successful, especially alive. But you know, maybe that was all part of his plan. Maybe he didn't expect nor want to come out alive. Well, he certainly didn't end up doing that, I'll tell you that much. In the Injustice reality, Joker and Harley Quinn team up to trick Superman into thinking Doomsday has returned. This causes Superman to go into a paranoid rage, fighting against Doomsday, who is later revealed to have been actually Lois. Oh no. But Superman was simply made to hallucinate Lois as Doomsday, which is how this all happened. In addition, Joker and Harley used this distraction to blow up Metropolis, causing Superman to kill Joker during his interrogation and renounce his former peaceful ways, becoming a superhero dictator who refuses to tolerate the state of the world any longer, basically forcing it into a totalitarian time of peace. Speaking of destructive villains, Galactus is known for being a destroyer on a much greater scale, I would say, than the Joker. He's a world destroyer, and the last thing I'd ever expect to see him doing is creating life. Hence why this twist involving him was so surprising. It wasn't your typical villain twist either, as it didn't have to do with him tricking someone or devising the end of a planet or a universe. It was actually kind of just the opposite. This Galactus, of course, was an alternate version who was basically forced back into an egg to incubate for longer than he had when he became Galactus, when Galen became Galactus. It was suggested that this was why Galactus was a destroyer, because he basically just wasn't fully cooked when he came into the world. So that's why he ended up being a bad guy. Kind of like a Pandora's box scenario, you know? Like you open Pandora's box and all the bad stuff comes out, but then you close it because you're scared. But really you should have just kept that open for longer because there was good stuff underneath. The plan worked, and after a little bit of extra time in his egg, Galactus instead emerged not as the world devourer, but instead as the life bringer, a creator of worlds instead of a destroyer and devourer of them. Hush was a mysterious character in the comics who we didn't know too much about when he first appeared. Initially, it seemed as though Jason Todd might somehow be the man under the mask. Actually, that was the original intention for this character's origin, fun fact, as we did see him as Jason, but then of course that was later kind of retconned that it was actually Clayface working at the behest of the real Hush to mess with Batman, and that's why he looked like Jason, and Jason was still dead. In fact, Hush was instead someone else. Not Jason, someone completely new. Or well, new to us, but an old friend to Bruce Wayne, Thomas Elliot, Bruce's childhood, basically best friend. His best friend also decided to kill his parents after Bruce lost his own, just so he could better relate to him. Yeah, Tommy was that guy. Basically like Bruce but more psychotic, giving even the new frenemy Ghostmaker a run for his money, to be honest. Ghostmaker has nothing on Hush, you know what I mean? Hush is nuts. Next up, another surprise reveal in regards to a villain's past relationships. In this case, not a friendship, but did you know that Apocalypse had a family? Yeah. He's got a family. This was not on my Krakoa Revelation bingo card, but then again, it was also through the Krakoan era that I learned Apocalypse had a magical origin, which I also wasn't expecting to learn about, but there you go. It was a great time of reinvention for the character of Apocalypse, especially in seeing him work alongside many mutants who for years we'd seen him actively fight against. We saw him in the entirely new role of sort of mutant savior, and I personally was waiting for him to just like reveal his true colors and turn traitor, but he didn't. In fact, we also learned by revisiting his origins the motivation for Apocalypse kinda seeking out other mutants, other than just survival of the fittest, ruling the world, blah blah blah. How he'd been from Arakko, originally Okara, when merged with the island of Krakoa, and how he'd been searching for a means to rescue his fellow mutants there, his people, who his wife, Genesis, led. Not only that, but Apocalypse and Genesis had a family together, with his children actually being his first horsemen. Literally, their names are War, Pestilence, Death, and Famine. Imagine growing up with any of those names. Imagine that being your name. Instead of me being like, hi, I'm Amanda, I'm just like, hi, I'm Pestilence. That's gonna shape you into the way you are. I'm not surprised these characters look how they do. Origin shifting is of course always surprising, whether it's for a villain or a hero. Barbatos is an interesting villain in the Batman mythos, especially when you consider that the Bat God has claimed to have created Batman from basically the ground up. He's claimed to be the bat that inspired a young Bruce, and even claimed to be the one behind orchestrating the death of Bruce's parents. According to Barbatos, this was all done as part of his plan to make Bruce secretly one of his own agents. Even though Bruce didn't know about this, or initially about Barbatos and the Dark Multiverse's existence. Of course, Bruce refused to give in to Barbatos' whims and did his best to resist him, but at the end of the day, Barbatos was still extremely successful across the Dark Multiverse, even still. Speaking of villains who like to claim responsibility for evil deeds in retrospect, enter Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom and Scarlet Witch are a pair that most people never would have thought would come together, and yet they did, and they have in the past. As shocking as this couple was, what was even more surprising was how much it seemingly kinda worked. Of course, this was in large part because Scarlet Witch was suffering from memory loss at the time. However, even after Wanda got her memories restored to her, she seemingly expressed an interest in making things kind of work with Doom, or at least, you know, trying to be there for him. Like, she definitely showed mercy towards him, but after Doom attempted to betray her and was caught in the act, he instead chose to claim that none of it had been real, and even for some reason took credit for the events of basically M-Day. Still waiting on an explanation for that one in the comics, unless it's just that, as I imagine, Doom is saving face for his ego here. Like, he's like, you think you do stuff, I do everything, I'm Doom. Don't look at me, I'm sensitive. I know inside Dr. Doom is a very sensitive person. I get that from him when I read comics featuring him. Oh, Victor. Some things in comics are seemingly made to never be explained or recovered, like our next point, Jason Todd, who was once known as one of those characters that was undoubtedly always to be permanently dead, meant to remain as a permanent mark of loss for Batman. This was a guy who was never ever expected to come back to life. It used to be a sacred three that basically encompassed a sense of permanent loss in the comics. After all, in a medium where the world feels like it's constantly at stake again and again, we need to have some permanent loss here, right? For the most part in comics, loss is something we don't expect to ever see permanently because so many other characters refuse to stay dead. Heroes and villains, and in some cases even civilians alike. I mean, that's what happens when you have a hero story and it's that cyclical, you know? People die, they come back to life, they die, they come back to life. The sacred three here, though, was Uncle Ben, Spider-Man's long-dead uncle, Bucky Barnes, Captain America's long-lost sidekick, and Jason Todd, Batman's long-mourned Robin. So you can imagine the surprise when Jason Todd showed back up, not just as Batman's Robin either, but instead returning as something completely new, something else, a new seeming villain, or at the very least, antagonist who went by the name of Red Hood. When characters change into something we weren't expecting, it catches us off guard, and this next one is another great example of that. I think for many of us, this was one of the most shocking and surprising reveals we had ever seen or read. This is because Invincible is an amazing series that really does play on the tropes and expectations we have when it comes to the superhero genre and the characters within it, and the archetypes within it. Omni-Man is a character we are introduced to in season 1 as a hero, one of the Earth's greatest heroes. Sure, he doesn't really belong to a team and prefers to stay separate from the Guardians of the Globe, but it seems irrefutable, at the beginning of episode 1 anyways, that he's, you know, a good guy. He still helps out the Guardians and acts in the way we expect a hero to. All of our expectations and ideas of him, though, are shattered when we see him go up against the Guardians and basically slaughter them. Everything we thought we knew about Omni-Man is questioned in this moment, and the realization dawns on the viewer and the reader that this is not going to be your typical superhero story, which is also why we love it.
Let's look at an odd love story, The Island Lovers. Krakoa, now the safe space for mutants to exist and thrive, is technically a mutant themselves. Well, half a mutant. Akara was an ancient mutant that eventually grew into a massive island. Pretty soon, someone came by with the Twilight Sword and cut the island in half. But using that sword caused a portal to Amenth to open. Amenth is a world in another dimension, and this world is dark and full of bad things. One half went there, that half was later named Araco, and the other half, Krakoa, stayed here on Earth. The two sides of this mutant were separated for a long time, growing on their own and becoming their own islands. In the era we are used to, Summoner was being sent on a mission to Earth from the Demon Planet, so he took a small part of Araco, the Arak Coral, as his mode of transport. If all that wasn't enough, something truly unexpected happened when the Coral met Krakoa. They got together, presumably in a romantic sense if the dialogue from the X-Men present is anything to go off of. In the end, the actual Araco Island wanted to stay as its own island, and it was just the Coral that got involved with the mutant safe haven.
Not only is this next moment in X-Men history centered around a surprise party, so surprise, but it also involves the most bizarre and unexpected turn of events. Professor X decided to throw a surprise party for Kitty Pryde and hired the most inappropriate clown, Obnoxio, for the party. In this first panel, we see Obnoxio smoking a cigar and thinking about how he's going to spend the pile of money the professor promised him. The even weirder part of the story is that while this crazy party is going down with this ridiculous clown, the X-Mansion is also at the same time infiltrated by a villainous mutant who can turn himself into ice cream. Yeah, and that's not even the weirdest thing about him. Appropriately, his name is Ice Cream, but it is not spelled like how you think. It's spelled like an eyeball and the shrieking sound that is referred to as a scream. What's more is no one seems to know that Obnoxio is even coming to this party. I guess it's like a super secret surprise. And Obnoxio also ends up in a ridiculous fight with the X-Men where he also surprisingly manages to hold his own pretty well.
I don't want that clown at my birthday party, but what I do want, genuine a history textbook from the Marvel Universe with all the changes Marvel characters have made to history, because Wolverine is everywhere. He is collecting major historical events like he is trying to fill out a bingo card. Today we are looking at the time he checked off the Valentine's Day Massacre. The year is 1929. Wolverine is established to be a smuggler for the Prohibition era, and he has a girlfriend. He is also, of course, being pursued by Victor Creed, Sabretooth, when is he not? Wolverine heads out into Chicago, but when he gets back to his hotel, his girlfriend is there on the floor, lifeless. Wolverine thinks it was Capone who did it, Al Capone, because they are in Chicago. But Al Capone insists it wasn't him, and he gives Wolverine a paper with the location of the guy who did it. Guess what the location was? That's right, the garage for the Valentine's Day event. There were 8 men there in the Marvel Universe, not 7. Of course, Wolverine's healing factor saves him, and we find out that the reason Al Capone even came up with the Valentine's Day treat was because Sabretooth suggested it. Do the Wolverine writers just have a roulette wheel in their office with all the painful historical events on it, and whenever they need inspo on how to make Wolverine's backstory more tragic, they just write about whatever it lands on? I don't know. Wolverine at the Valentine's Day event and Sabretooth being the mastermind behind it is just something I never ever could have predicted.
Wolverine and Sabretooth both do have a surprising amount to do with history. I guess that's what happens when you get as old as they get to be. But we all know that Cyclops, aka Scott Summers, has always, as long as he's been around, which has been a lot less of time, had a thing for Jean. But when it comes to the classic X-Men team, he actually wasn't the only one. In fact, pretty much everyone was head over heels for Jean at one point, maybe except for Bobby, who back in the day, honestly, he did like to flirt, but mainly was really more in love with ice cream. Bobby was truly the youngest of the bunch, as is evident by his super obsession with ice cream. Both Angel and Beast also seem to hold a bit of a flame for the lone female member of the X-Men team, with Angel actually being pretty close at a few points to winning Jean's heart. But in one fateful panel, we'd even learn that Charles Xavier, yep, the professor, Jean's mentor and teacher, was also apparently in love with her. Maybe not as surprising at the time, but certainly not something you'd expect to look back on and see in retrospect if you are a fan of more modern comics or even stuff that was like the early 2000s, you know what I mean? Especially when we are later given the retconned origin of Professor X first meeting Jean when her powers first manifested as a child after the traumatic loss of her best friend Annie. Yeah, just makes it's weird.
Wolverine cheers for the Calgary Flames. I know, I can't believe it either. Alberta kids, we have 2 choices growing up, the Oilers or the Flames, and this Edmonton girl argues that he picked the wrong side, not to throw stones from a glass house. In Wolverine First Class 6, Wolverine is tasked with babysitting on the night of the 7th game in the Stanley Cup playoffs. He's not missing it for a single flamin' thing. He is also featured in another panel eating donuts off his claws, and in my world, they are from Timmy's. Wolverine rightly claims that it's his moral right as a Canadian to watch hockey when he wants. It's what he does best. The X-Men are truly in another universe because I don't think the Calgary Flames were in the Stanley Cup playoffs in 2008, the year this comic dropped, or the year before, or the year after. In my very intense research about why Wolverine might be a Calgary Flames fan and not a fan of a good team, one particular Reddit comment caught my eye, and it's about Wolverine's healing factor. See, his healing factor helps him come back from pretty much anything, even regenerating from just a single drop of him. This user commented, "I'm sure having the ability to almost instantly heal from any wound helps you when you're a Flames fan." Not to start a hockey war, but facts are facts. I know I'm about to get cooked in the comments section, I know that, sorry.
When Cassandra Nova was first introduced in the comic, she was considered to be quite a mysterious figure. And I think that's why there were a lot of folks out there who were surprised when we learned of her origin. Now, as cool of a character as I feel like she is, her origin sure is super weird and super hard if you're just explaining it to someone who doesn't read comics. And in that way, I guess it's pretty unexpected. Although, as a comic book fan, I guess I found it less surprising than maybe some other folks would because, well, comics. Cassandra Nova was initially believed to be this mutant-adjacent villain, yet kind of a very different being. She wasn't a human, but she wasn't exactly a mutant either, so what was she? Well, we later find out that she was in fact neither. She was a Mumadride, that's a thing. The evil twin sister of Charles Xavier, who was born without a body, and so replicated her brother's body kind of in the womb. As with all Mumadri in regards to the Shi'ar's beliefs surrounding them, Mumadri are basically like our evil anti-selves that manifest when we're first born and we gotta fight them to be born. Charles sensed that Cassandra was bad, battled her, and won in order to be born. But she was able to live on by sheer force, starting as a blob of cells in a sewer wall and eventually growing into the physical being that we'd all come to know. Seriously, that's her origin. Even more wild is the fact that this origin is actually unique to Cassandra. You see, not all Mumadri can do this. She was only able to accomplish such a feat because of the genetic potential of her brother Charles. Even for a Mumadri, it's weird, you know?
Everyone's favorite web slinger was almost an X-Men. Spider-Man and the X X-Men rarely team up, and X-Men 27 might explain why. Beast and Iceman find Spider-Man to ask if he wants to join the team. Spider-Man turns them down because he already turned down the Avengers at that point, plus he's super busy and he believes he's destined to work alone. He was still in his emo teen era. Spider-Man swings away before the X-Men pair can argue further. Maybe we don't see Spidey with the X-Men all that much anymore because they're still hurting from this interaction.
I know, I was certainly surprised by the ending to one of my favorite recent mutant team series, Hellions. In the final issue, issue number 18, the Hellions are forced to face the music after Orphan Maker is basically put on trial for breaking one of Krakoa's 3 governing laws. It's like the 3 things that they say on Krakoa, just don't do these things and you're cool. Ugh. As a result, Orphan Maker is sentenced to exile in the pit, and Nanny basically decides to go with him. It's all super heartbreaking. Thinking about it makes me want to cry. Now the other members of the team are basically forced to disband by the council. Now directionless, they return to life even more dejected than they were at the beginning of the series, with none of them really feeling at home any longer on the mutant island nation of Krakoa. For a series about found family and purpose, it honestly ends on a very tragic note.
A man in the X-Men universe just recently gave birth to a space station. I'm as shocked as you are. Nothing in my life could have prepared me to say that sentence or explain it. So at the Hellfire Gala, something that Amanda actually talked about in part 1, a lot happens. Explosions and fighting and a birth. Monarch has reality warping powers and he's known to be an Omega level mutant, so he used his powers to impregnate himself with the space station to keep it safe. The station was Peak 7, later called Keep, and the station was used as a means of communication between Krakoa and Arakko, the 2 mutant islands we actually covered at the beginning.
This moment is so strange. I literally reacted to my thought about what I was about to say and I was like, man, this is a really weird one. It's really that weird, guys. Hold my hand because it's gonna get weird. This moment is so strange that it needs to just be mentioned. It needs to be immortalized in this video, so here we go. At the beginning of Uncanny X-Men issue number 178, we see Professor X reminiscing on the first student to join his X-Men team, Scott Summers. Cyclops had recently left the team to settle down with his new wife, Madeline Pryor, who looks exactly like Jean. You see, Scott had considered that she actually might be the reincarnation of Jean, but don't worry, we later find out she was actually Jean's clone, created by Mr. Sinister using a spark from the Phoenix. Professor X is reading a letter he's received from Scott detailing the events of his newlywed life, and it includes a picture of Scott. But not just Scott, it's Scott and Maddie in bed together. What? Not only is this a weird thing to send your teacher slash kind of pseudo father figure, but it's also weird in the sense that it makes you wonder, who took that photo? Number 10. Vandal Savage. So this one comes to us from the alternate world belonging to Deceased. You might be thinking, but wait a minute, Amanda, isn't it a given that these characters in Deceased will die? It's Deceased after all, and this world is filled with anti-life equation zombies. And yes, it is a given. But just because we know they're going to die doesn't mean the way that their death comes about or the sheer terror of how it happens can't surprise and astound us. That is exactly the case for villain Vandal Savage, part of one of the groups we follow in the Deceased Unkillable series. It turns out Vandal himself was, well, not so unkillable when Wonder Woman catches the ancient immortal off guard, busting in and almost insta-killing him before he even has time to properly react by ripping him in half. The psh is the blood splatter. Number 9. Jason Todd. I'm ranking this one low because, I mean, we really all should have known to expect this death, and yet somehow we didn't. Jason's reception as a character was rocky, and it was because of this that DC contemplated killing his character off altogether. To decide, they put out a bulletin in their comics asking people to call in and vote as to whether or not Jason Todd would survive or die during the story arc Death in the Family. People voted, but not thinking their vote would actually matter. They never thought DC would actually just kill Jason Todd because of a fan poll, and yet that is exactly what they did. Jason died and fans were left flabbergasted despite the fact that some of them had actually sealed his fate. Number 8. Superman. Well, this might not seem as shocking now. When Death of Superman first came out, it was so unexpected it made real-world headlines. News was out that Superman was dead, one of comics' most iconic heroes of all time. How did that happen? The new and unstoppable villain Doomsday appeared on the scene and Superman was forced to put a stop to him. Or try, at least. Superman succeeded, but at the cost of his life, with both hero and villain appearing to die of their injuries in the comic. The pitch for this story evolved out of a joke regarding ideas for how to boost sales, which it actually ended up successfully doing. The comic Death of Superman sold like hotcakes and also helped to boost sales for Superman's return story in Reign of the Supermen. Moving on, Grail recently made a surprising reappearance in the comics. We haven't seen her for a while, and she is one of my favorite Wonder Woman villains. She's the daughter of an Amazon assassin, Myrna, and new god Darkseid. She's pretty epic. She's basically like the opposite of Wonder Woman. While she is a great Wonder Woman villain, it was pretty cool and unexpected to see her agree to work with other fellow Wonder Woman villains at the behest of the Sovereign and the United States. And if you want to catch more Grail action, you gotta go check out the new Wonder Woman series, Wonder Woman from 2023 by Tom King. It's really good. At least so I hear. I hear it's really good. Everything that I've seen in it looks really good. I gotta add it to my pull list, and I gotta catch up and read all of it. While Khonshu has never particularly been known as the most gracious, kindest, or compassionate of gods, he is usually an ally to Moon Knight. And while Moon Knight isn't always a perfect cookie-cutter hero, he is ultimately a hero, except for this time around. That's because Khonshu made Mark into an antagonist when he sought to defeat Mephisto, who he claimed was basically attempting to take over the Earth. So he was like, Mark, you gotta help me, we gotta beat Mephisto, just trust me. The problem was that Khonshu got Mark to gather the Avengers' weapons and items of power, hoping to use them to defeat Mephisto, so that he could basically rule Earth himself. Next up, one of my favorite reveals of all time, especially in regards to the MCU, not only because it was fairly unexpected, even as someone who has a pretty good handle on who Agatha Harkness is and what she's capable of, but because it has to be the catchiest villain reveal ever. While we all had many theories for who was the great villain in WandaVision, other than maybe Wanda herself to an extent, other theories were simply just more popular than Agatha being the one behind it all. I mean, we all knew it was probably Agatha Harkness there, we all knew that, but to think that she was the mastermind, not a lot of us were expecting that, to be fair. Agatha, while sometimes a villain, is more well known as an ally in the comics, so for it to be revealed that she was actually the one behind it, that it had been Agatha all along, that caught us by surprise. Over at DC Comics, we have another usually ally who instead was revealed to be a villain. Perhaps not the whole time, but definitely upon his return. Jason Todd was a character that we never expected to see again, so his coming back at all was pretty shocking. For a while there, it was implied that Jason would be Hush, and in fact, that was the initial intention for the Hush reveal in the comics. Fun fact. And this might have been one of the few indications to fans that DC Comics was maybe thinking about planning his return. Jason Todd came back to Batman's world not as a former ally and Robin, but instead as just the opposite, a villain, who blamed Batman for the fact that the man who nearly killed him was still on the loose. Of course, that man being the Joker. As such, Jason Todd had a different approach to vigilantism once he returned that made him a villain at the start, and more of an anti-hero, I'd say, as he's evolved. Heroes becoming villains is one thing, but what about when villains become heroes? Or disguising themselves as heroes, at least. When it comes to Spider-Man alternates, we have a lot of them, it's true. But one that I would have never expected to see is a version of Spider-Man who was a straight up villain. Or, scratch that, a version of Spider-Man who was just straight up one of his most iconic villains, Dr. Octopus. But that is what we got with this story arc. Doc Ock's body was failing and he managed to convince Peter to visit him before he shuffled off this mortal coil. However, this of course was a trap, and Otto used this opportunity to swap bodies with the young Spider-Man. As a result, Spider-Man's mind ended up in Doc Ock's failing body, and Doc Ock's mind ended up in Peter's much younger and powerful one. Surprise, surprise. This was how Dr. Octopus was able to defeat death, but tragically, Spider-Man actually did end up dying here, even more surprising. Or at least he died at the time. His consciousness would actually still live on somewhat, as it existed to some extent within his body, and later on, Otto would relinquish Spider-Man's body back to the consciousness of Peter, which was left remaining inside his physical form. Basically got stronger as time went on, and then eventually Otto was like, you know what? Maybe you should just be you, and I'll just be me. We'll just go our separate ways. Superior Spider-Man, out. Not quite as dramatic as a body swap, but still pretty dramatic. I really love this next one. And I think for many of us, this twist caught us completely by surprise. Might be the most twisty reveal we've ever had. In fact, this twist and character became so iconic that she made her way from the animated universe to the comic book one. Yeah. Have you guessed it yet? Yeah, I'm talking about Andrea Beaumont, and the reveal that she was actually the Batman antagonist, Phantasm. Andrea Beaumont was introduced to us as one of Bruce's old flames, who he actually almost ended up settling down with back in the day. She knew Bruce better than most others. That is also what made it such a great and compelling reveal and twist, because it also then kind of made sense that Phantasm was such a great foil for Batman, because she was someone that knew Bruce so well, so kind of works out, kind of makes sense.
Alright, coming in at number 10, we have Kyle Rayner gets the cold shoulder. If a villain can't take down a hero, usually the first thing they go for are their loved ones. I mean, they usually are way weaker than the hero, and it's one of the only ways you can hurt them emotionally. And an emotionally unstable hero is easier to take down than someone who is clear-headed and focused. And Kyle Rayner would learn this the hard way. After flying around in space, saving the universe from all the strangest things in the galaxy, you think he would be ready to see it all. I mean, what on earth could be more shocking than meeting a race of aliens hell-bent on destroying the universe? Well, how about finding your girlfriend stuffed in a fridge? That's right, one of the greatest Green Lanterns would come home to find his girlfriend murdered and compacted right next to the condiments. That is definitely going to make it hard to love again. Coming in at number 9, we have Batgirl's Got Some Bad Manners. Swearing in comics is nothing new, but for a lot of the most popular DC characters, you will never see this pop up on the page because the comics need to be sold to a wide range of readers, which is kind of strange because you can totally have people getting their heads smashed in until they're unconscious, but no curse words. Well, in one of the issues of All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder, Batgirl screams out, "Sell your poison someplace else, this arcade belongs to the effing Batgirl." Now, this shouldn't have been a big deal, as the people at DC blacked out the lettering so you couldn't see what Batgirl was saying, but you could put the pieces together in your head. That's not the shocking part. The shocking part is that the blacking out of the lettering on many of the issues wasn't dark enough, and most of the readers could make out what she was saying. So this was a huge screw up for DC, and they had to recall a ton of the comics and put new versions on the shelves that had the swear words completely blacked out. Coming in at number 8, we have Starfire Gets Too Sexy. Now, it's no surprise for female characters to be over-sexualized in comic books, but for this particular example, it was so blatant that Starfire fans were up in arms about this. I first got introduced to Starfire in Teen Titans, and she seemed to be like a clueless alien girl who had some pretty intense powers. In the comics, she was a pretty interesting character, well, until they spruced her up for the New 52. And by spruced her up, I mean they gave her some massive boobs and basically made her the horniest character in the Justice League. The center point of the new character was all about sexy, and it seemed that she was walking around trying to hook up with every last attractive person with a pulse. Since then, the character has been reworked to embrace her sexual side with a little bit more taste by having her come from a homeworld where monogamy isn't a thing. That sounds like a great place. But when the character first changed, people were feeling a little fiery.
Number 7, Elongated Man. This is one of those deaths where it felt like Sue Dibney, Elongated Man's wife, had died, and comic writers felt therefore he should die also? To, I guess, keep the married couple together? You get married together, you live together, you die together? Is that what you promise when you get married to someone? Sue died in Identity Crisis. Her murder was the mystery readers watched the heroes unravel and attempt to solve. Shortly after, Elongated Man Ralph Dibney attempted to resurrect her and then had to fight Felix Faust, who was disguised as Nabu, but who apparently Ralph knew was actually Faust the entire time. These two fight, the Elongated Man dies, and Faust becomes imprisoned. All that so Sue and Ralph really can be together and become ghost detectives. Nope, I'm not kidding. Number 6, Green Arrow. Remember that time Oliver Queen died because he didn't want to sacrifice his arm to live? Yep. Also, why did he even have to stick his arm in this bomb in the first place? Seems like a bad move. I don't know why he really chose to do that. It's a little unclear to me in that comic. In Green Arrow issues 99 to 101, we are taken on this roller coaster of an illogical ride that ultimately ends in Ollie's death. He has his hand in a Russian bomb, and rather than let Superman deal with it any other way, he chooses to die. I don't think anyone would have expected that choice from Green Arrow, and yet one of the best strategies they came up with, well, more Superman came up with, because at this point Ollie's pretty much ready to give up, it seems, is to remove Oliver's arm and fly him to safety. And then I guess return to secure the bomb before it explodes, with Green Arrow's arm still keeping the dead man switch safely in place. Assuming that would work. It isn't that Ollie wants to risk that this plan might not work though, he just doesn't want to sacrifice his arm in order to live. And so he dies. I guess if you shoot arrows with your arm, you're like, how will I live without shooting arrows? There's a lot of other things you could do, Oliver. Number 5. Blue Beetle. Blue Beetle was one of the most shocking deaths because of who was pulling the trigger. At this point, we might now see Maxwell Lord as a dangerous and more villainous figure not to be messed with, but at the time, he was believed to be an ally of the Justice League, not someone who would betray them. So this death caught many off guard. What had happened was that Blue Beetle discovered that Lord had been against them the whole time and was using his position to gather intel on superheroes and basically destroy the Justice League International from the inside out. Maxwell still seemed to see Blue Beetle as a friend though, as he did offer him the chance to join him and protect the world against the superhuman threat. But Ted Kord refused and as such was killed by Lord. Number 4. Silver St. Cloud. This death was very shocking at the time, although to be fair, we should know that if it seems like Batman is about to get a happily ever after moment, it's too good to be true. And something is likely about to go sideways. Such was the case with Silver St. Cloud. Silver was a Gotham socialite who dated Bruce Wayne way back in the 70s in the comics, but the two ended up splitting when she learned that Bruce Wayne was actually Batman. Silver couldn't stand the thought of losing Bruce and of him constantly being in danger. Years later, however, she would walk back into Bruce's life and end up back in his arms once more, ready to accept and come to understand and respect his responsibilities as Batman. Bruce even considered hanging up his cowl and retiring from the vigilante life for Silver so that they could start a life all their own together. Unfortunately, just as this seemed like it would be a reality, Batman's new partner, Baphomet, was revealed to be villain Automatopoeia, tragically killing Silver instantly with a slit while Bruce's back was turned. Batman, if you're ever gonna be happy, don't trust it. Number 3. Batman. This one is pretty recent, so if you don't want some recent going-ons of the comics to be spoiled, you might want to skip this point. Alright, now that you've been warned, let's continue on. Recently in death metal, our heroes have discovered the Perpetua is planning to harness the energy of 3 major DC crises by building them again and making them recur. As such, Wonder Woman, Superman, and Batman each set out 2 separate ones with the hopes of saving those lives endangered by this plot. Black Lantern Batman is tasked with handling Crisis on Infinite Earths, but realizes shortly after arriving that he's already too late. He finds himself coming undone, dissolving into antimatter. It's a brutal page, but what's more unexpected is a few pages later when all our heroes are all back to normal and together again. What? Number 2. Poison Ivy. Ivy's death in Heroes in Crisis literally came out of nowhere, and if no one saw it coming, it's just because of how fast it happened. Huh, pun intended. Ivy was one of the few killed in the Sanctuary Massacre, accidentally killed by hero Wally West when he lost control. Fortunately, Wally was able to bring Ivy back using a rose she'd given to Harley Quinn in order to, in essence, regrow her. She came back with a whole new look as well. However, even though her death ended up being temporary, it was still pretty shocking and unexpected, considering how popular Poison Ivy has been throughout comics as both a villain and an anti-hero. Number 1. Alex DeWitt. If you read comics of any kind, you'll likely know who Alex DeWitt is. Her name has become almost synonymous with the comic book term fridging, coined by writer Gail Simone. The term even has its own website, which Simone made in 1999 for the sole purpose of documenting various other times women in comics were fridged. In other words, female characters being sacrificed, depowered, or assaulted for the advancement of a male character's plot. Alexandra DeWitt, known for being Kyle Rayner's girlfriend, was one of the most shocking deaths of this kind that helped to basically highlight the way female characters were often used and treated in comics. Alex was killed by Major Force, a villain who strangled her and then stuffed her in the fridge, leaving her for Kyle to find upon his return. Unexpected for many.
Coming in at number 10, we've got the Blue Beetle. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. That's what they always say, right? Well, that's what happened here. An enemy got in real close. Too close, in fact, seeing as his proximity allowed him to absolutely dome the Blue Beetle. Let me explain. Back before Infinite Crisis, Maxwell Lord wasn't seen as a villain. In fact, this would-be baddie was a friend to the Justice League, or so they thought. Because as soon as he had the opportunity, Mr. Lord pulled out his gun and blew the Blue Beetle away. Poor Ted Kord didn't even see it coming. And neither did anyone reading. This kind of betrayal was totally out of the blue and threw a lot of fans way off. At the time this came out, it was an insanely unpredictable move, especially as the Blue Beetle was wasted right in front of his best friend. Maxwell Lord would go on to cause plenty more trouble for the Justice League, but it's hard to imagine acts worse than gaining the trust of a superhero, and all of his fans, only to absolutely annihilate him when his guard was down. Coming in number 9, we've got Rorschach. Watchmen is such a rich tome, full of all sorts of overlapping storylines and fascinating characters. A fan favorite has to be the Inkblot man himself, eater of cold beans and thrower of hot oil, Rorschach. It's funny that this character, styled after the perception testing psychological assessment, can be interpreted by different people in different ways. Sure, Moore may have created him as a way to showcase the flaws in other similar superheroes, but a lot of folks saw the brooding, ultra-violent detective as a symbol of edgy justice. There's a lot of depth to Rorschach, which is compounded upon throughout the graphic novel as he skulks in the darkness attempting to solve a puzzle that isn't meant to be solved. We learn of his traumatic childhood and of his deep insecurities and complexes, and his pathological need to beat the ever-living daylights out of anyone who may stand in his way. However, after all of this, poor Rorschach goes out with a simultaneous bang and whimper. In a world full of vigilantes limited by their own human bodies and heroes bankrolled by higher powers, running into a true superhuman is something else. So when Rorschach, after all of his night-crawling antics, runs into Dr. Manhattan, he's unable to really do anything. He's no longer in his city, and his rage at the world around him is unbridled. Unable to compromise his morals, Rorschach would have threatened the peace Ozymandias and Manhattan worked towards if he was allowed to live. So Dr. Manhattan just blows him up. On first read, it really is surprising. It seems like it happens out of the blue. But going back and considering all that was happening, it sort of makes sense. Still though, who expects the character they've followed through greasy back alleys and horrific prisons to suddenly burst like a balloon? Coming in at number 8, we've got Wolverine. Damn, who would have thought that the adamantium-boned super freak could die, right? He essentially doesn't age and can heal from pretty much any wound, so how does one kill Wolverine? Well, it went down in a pretty fitting fashion, that's for sure. You can understand that old Logan would be pretty tired after all his years of heroism and hurt, so when his healing factor finally crapped out, it was time for a long rest. However, he wasn't going down alone. Deciding he would prevent any other Wolverines from coming into existence, and in doing so hopefully stop anyone from feeling pain as he has, he sought out Dr. Abraham Cornelius, the man who performed the life-altering experiments on him. The fight was intense and resulted in Wolverine being covered in liquid adamantium. Fitting, right? The stuff that's helped keep him alive from the inside all these years, now totally surrounding and suffocating him. He went down doing what was important to him though, which is also fitting. I suppose a lot of people did see this coming, considering the run was known as the death of Wolverine, but comics have teased the death of major heroes in the past and then found ways around that sort of permanency. It's just wild to see a character who couldn't die if they tried finally take the big sleep.
Coming in at number 7, we have Wiener Tentacles. Staying in the realm of the New 52, we're going to talk about the Swamp Thing, one of the quietly most powerful characters in the DC universe. And every time I see one of the covers from this comic, I get the feeling that I'm looking at a poster from a 1950s monster movie, in a good way. And the cover of issue 11 was no different. You have Swamp Thing carrying his loved one through a barrage of tentacles that seem to be attacking her. The only problem is the tentacles looked a little bit like wieners. A lot of fans started commenting about how the tube-like appendages looked a lot like those things that dangle between a dude's thighs, and it didn't help that these tentacles were a peach color, so they very much looked like a skin tone. This was so much of a problem that the comics had to be recalled and the artwork reworked. This was one of the funniest mistakes I have ever heard of. Coming in at number 6, we have who actually created Batman. If you go back through Batman's history, you usually find that a lot of people always say Bob Kane was the person who made Batman, that it was all his idea and he was the only dude who came up with all the amazing features that we know and love as the Dark Knight. Well, that's actually not true at all. Bob was the artist who created the look of Batman, which is arguably the least important part of the character. Yeah, he did make the dude look super cool, but Bill Finger was the mind behind making most of the important pieces of Batman, like the Batmobile, the different gadgets, Robin, and even the Joker. And who would Batman be without the Joker? And the writer is technically the one who came up with the idea of the character, not to discredit the artist, but we understand the difference. Well, why is it that everyone remembers Bob Kane as the guy who created Batman? Well, because he forced the people at DC to sign a contract that said he was the sole creator of Batman. So going back to the history, it's revealed that this dude was kind of a
Coming at number 5, we have Jason Todd's death. If something like this happened today, it would for sure play out the same way because we know how the internet works, but I love this story because it just goes to show you how trolls have existed forever. When Jason Todd was brought into the fray as the new Robin, there came a time where he was kidnapped by the Joker, and DC Comics brought it to the fans to determine his fate. They would ask the public to vote on whether or not this child would die, and the fans voted yes. Wait, what? Yeah, dude, this is what happened. When you ask the public their opinion on something that doesn't really matter, they usually choose something like this. Like when that research vessel got named Bodie McBoatface. Well, I think the shocking part is that DC stuck true to the fans' vote and they killed off Jason Todd, who would later come back as the much cooler Red Hood. Coming in at number 4, we have Joker wears his own face. You have to give it up to the writers over at DC. The Joker has been in their stable of characters since the beginning, and they find ways to keep making him crazier. Like the time he had the doll maker cut off his own face and then he vanished for a year. Then he would reemerge by breaking into Gotham PD and stealing his face back and hooking it back on with some staples, clips, and bungee cords. Talk about making an entrance. You disappear for over a year, then you come back to Gotham, kill a bunch of cops, and staple your own face back on. Bravo. Coming in at number 3, we have Sue Dibney and Dr. Light. Comics will stretch into graphic content quite often when it comes to combat and death, but there have been a few occasions where they've taken dark storylines even further. There was the case of Elongated Man's wife Sue Dibney and her encounter with Dr. Light. No one remembered this because their minds had been erased through the means of magic, but eventually it all came to the surface that Dr. Light had violated Elongated Man's wife, Sue Dibney. The reason that everyone finds out about this is because Sue Dibney was actually murdered, and the investigation of her murder is what revealed all these horrible acts. Coming in at number 2, we have Rorschach Goes Boom. The Watchmen still stands as one of the greatest comic book stories ever told. The social commentary on the Cold War timeline that is completely changed by the fact that an all-knowing super being is living in America, and you have a mystery that keeps everyone's head spinning until the last minute. Well, this all builds up when eventually the truth is out that Ozymandias orchestrated an attack on American soil to kill thousands of people and made it look like it was Dr. Manhattan. This way the human race would have a common enemy, and this would prevent nuclear war between America and the Soviets. The idea behind this is killing thousands would save billions. Well, Rorschach is one of the only characters in the book that has a solid moral compass, and he refuses to let the unjust go unpunished and sets out to tell the truth. But Dr. Manhattan sides with Ozymandias, seeing his plan as salvation, and in order to keep it in motion, he obliterates Rorschach into little pieces. And coming in at the number 1 spot, we have Barbara Gordon getting shot. To this day, this is one of the most controversial moments in comics. You have Barbara Gordon just chilling in her house. There's a knock at the door. She's like, oh, who could that be? She answers the door, and before she can say, why is the Joker dressed like Jason Segel and forgetting Sarah Marshall, she's getting shot. The bullet would go into her spine, putting her in a wheelchair because she lost the use of her legs and could no longer go out into the field as Batgirl. This created an interesting new element to her character when she became the Oracle, but her getting shot wasn't even the most graphic part of this encounter with the Clown Prince of Crime. He then assaults Barbara, takes explicit photos of her, and puts them into a horrifying funhouse which he subjects her father to try and make him go insane. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that that was extremely shocking and none of us saw that coming.